to highlight Dundee's response to the coronavirus crisis and applaud the resilience shown by our people. I would also like us to remember those who have died. Across the city, there is real grief being suffered by families who have lost loved ones. This council is united in sending our condolences and sympathies to all those who have suffered in any way due to the coronavirus. And I will soon be calling on us all to observe a minute's silence to show our respect. As Lord Provost, I am proud to see how Dundee people have displayed real responsibility in the face of this global health emergency. This could be witnessed in the early quiet streets during the early stages of the lockdown, while staying at home was vital. You can see it now in the number of face coverings that are being worn by people out shopping. From children to pensioners, we have all made sacrifices to help ensure that the deadly effects of this virus can be minimised. We have made real progress over the weeks and months to get out to this stage, even though many challenges lie ahead. I am optimistic that by maintaining our vigilance, we will see life return more to normal. I would like to take this opportunity also to recognise all those who served in key positions to keep our city running throughout this period. These range from the nurses and doctors in our intensive care units to the shop workers stocking shelves and the volunteer who delivered lifeline supplies to those who were shielding, and also City Council employees. They all played a crucial part in helping the rest of us to get through these very trying times. As a city, we can be proud of what we have achieved in the face of a grave threat. I hope that Dundee people can take inspiration from these efforts as we move forward together. Thank you. Now, if any other member wishes to say something, please invite them to do so. All right.
Billy Borthwick.
Nobody?
Lord Provost.
Anybody?
Lord Provost.
Right.
Lord Provost, Bailey Keenan wishes to speak.
Right.
Lord Provost, I think it was appropriate you made fitting remarks at the start of the meeting. I think you've hit the note right by mentioning the wide range of employees that have given so much over this period of time, right down to the shop worker who's was needed there to make sure that we were all fed and looked after, shelf stocked and the like, while others were in lockdown. I think it would be appropriate at some time to mark the occasion in the city, and I'm sure you would be minded to do so, given so many people have been unable to mourn family as they would, and mourn loved ones and lost friends like they probably would have done previously. You know, when it's allowed to 6 people at a funeral, there isn't the same comfort that that some families would have had when they were able to pack out churches or the crematoria. And I think that, you know, we need to sort of mark that. There's a lot of individuals that were able to say goodbye to loved ones over a bit of FaceTime, like we're having this meeting at the moment. So come the appropriate time, I think, you know, through your good office, it would be appropriate to step up as a city and mark this whole event in some way. You know, I look forward to some of the proposals and perhaps your own ideas on how that should be achieved. Thank you, Lord Provost.
Thank you, Billy. Anybody else?
Lord Provost, Bailey McPherson, Bailey Scott and Councillor Alexander also wish to speak.
Right.
Do you wish me to go ahead, Lord Provost, then, as I was
Carry
mentioning?
on.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I would just like to concur very much with your own comments and those of Bailey Keenan. I think these comments very much hit the right note. I think we all owe a massive debt of gratitude to key workers across the city, the staff of Dundee City Council, and indeed the large number of volunteers across the city who have done so much to help our city in the past few challenging months. I think we also should really be thanking the people of Dundee who have responded in as great a manner as one could have hoped in terms of sticking to the rules and doing what is right in what is the most challenging period in terms of a health emergency that our city has faced probably for a century. I think it has shown the great community spirit in Dundee, and that continues. And I think that is a great strength of Dundee and its people. So I'm very grateful, Lord Provost, for your comments this evening, which I feel have very much hit the right note. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bailey Scott was next to indicate wishing to speak, Lord Provost.
Really.
Hello, Lord Provost. It's good to see you. I hope you're well. Like you, Lord Provost, I'd like to express my appreciation and that of my group colleagues to all council staff and key workers and volunteers who responded so brilliantly to the pandemic and were there to keep essential services going and supporting the vulnerable in our communities and keeping us all safe from the virus. I'd also like to salute the vast majority of the Dundee public who followed the guidelines, stayed at home and limited the spread of the virus. And as you say, very sadly, some Dundee residents succumbed to the illness, and they and their grieving families must be in our thoughts. Finally, I'd also like to acknowledge the fortitude of our young people, especially those who weren't able to sit exams this year. The last time a group of young people would have faced a world crisis would have probably been their great-grandparents' generation. And I think that our young people have done remarkably well during the virus period. Thank you, Lord Provost.
Thank you.
The final elected member wishing to speak is Councillor Alexander, Lord Provost.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Provost, and thank you for the other members for their comments. I think, again, the tone has been struck very well. I think the reality in the situation as it is at the moment is that thanks will be repaid or have to be repaid on a weekly basis because we continue to deal with the ill effects of this virus. And clearly, the direct health impacts have been at the forefront of all of our minds, but they continue to have other impacts upon the city of Dundee, both economic and the impact upon education in the city. And across all of that, it's brought real hardship to people in Dundee, and I think we're all very alive to that. I think it's also, I suppose, incumbent upon me to thank all of you in many ways, because over the last 6 months, I think across the political divide, we've all come together and worked together for the best interests of the people of the city. And I hope that is something that continues long into the future. So again, just to echo those comments and thank you all as well.
Thank you, members.
Lord Provost, Councillor Lynn has indicated he wishes to speak.
All right, thank you.
Hi, I'll just keep this very brief. I just, as Vice Chair of the Integration Joint Board of the Health and Social Care Partnership, I just want to particularly thank the staff, both of Dundee City Council and NHS Tayside, who have continued to provide services to our most vulnerable sections of society in Dundee, and often with the associated anxiety with this terrible COVID-19 virus. They were exposing themselves to infection, but despite that, they provided a wonderful service and deserve our thanks.
Thank you. Now we'll proceed now to a minute's silence in memory of those who have suffered so far. Thank you. We'll just Thank you. Dundee City Council business. We'll proceed now to the business of Dundee City Council. Mr. Manny.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Welcome to this meeting of Dundee City Council and its committees, which is being held remotely in terms of Section 43 of the Local Governance in Scotland Act 2003. All members in attendance are able to fully participate in the meeting, and the meeting is being recorded. Should any member need to leave the meeting for any reason, can they please use the meeting chat to advise of this? If a member loses their connection, they should make every effort to rejoin the meeting, but if this is not possible, the Committee Services Officer will note their absence for the remainder of the meeting. If a member has to leave the meeting due to a declaration of interest, please remain out of the meeting until invited back in. Would all members please mute their microphones when not speaking to avoid background noise, and turn off any smart speakers. Please start the meeting with your camera on. Your face will appear on the screen when you are speaking. If your connection is poor, you may wish to turn off your camera and see if this improves matters. If that doesn't help, you may wish to quickly leave the meeting and rejoin. If a member wishes to raise a point of order, ask a question, speak on any item or move a motion or amendment, please use the meeting chat. The convener will then invite you to speak. Where items are for noting or where there has been no disagreement expressed, the convener will call for any member who has a contrary view to indicate this through the meeting chat. Otherwise, the item will be agreed. Please do not use the meeting chat for any other purposes, as those joining the meeting by telephone cannot see the meeting chat and therefore will not be able to follow the debate. Although we are operating in a different way, this is still a formal meeting of the committee, and the required standards of behaviour and discussion are the same as in a face-to-face meeting. Standing orders will apply to the proceedings, and the terms of the Councillors' Code of Conduct will also apply in the normal way. Does any member have any queries regarding this procedure? If so, please indicate in meeting chat. There are no comments, so I shall now ask the Committee Services Officer to rate the roll call for the minute.
Okay, Lord Provost is present. Councillor Alexander.
I'm present.
Deputy Lord Provost Campbell.
Present.
Councillor Cadell.
Present.
Councillor Dawson. Councillor Dawson.
Present.
Councillor Flynn.
Present.
Councillor Hunter.
Present.
Councillor Lynn.
I'm here.
Councillor Rendell.
Present.
Bailey Roberts.
I'm here.
Councillor Rome.
Present.
Councillor Ross.
Present.
Bailey Sawyers.
Present.
Councillor Short.
Here.
Councillor Smith.
I'm here.
Bailey Keenan.
Present.
Councillor Cruikshank.
Here.
Councillor McCready.
Present.
Councillor McIrvin.
Present.
Councillor Malone.
Present.
Councillor Mara.
Present.
Councillor Richardson.
Present.
Bailey Wright.
Present.
Bailey Scott.
I'm here.
Councillor Hay.
Present.
Councillor Scott.
Present.
Bailey McPherson.
Present.
Councillor Duncan.
Present.
Councillor Murray.
I'm here.
That concludes the roll call.
Lord Provost, members of the Council, there are two items of business this evening. First of all, the minutes for information and record purposes. Are these agreed?
Agreed.
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 And the second item of business, general business. These matters were dealt with as essential council business at an earlier stage of the pandemic, and again are for information and record purposes. Are these agreed?
Agreed.
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 That concludes the business of the meeting, Lord Provost. The next meeting is the Community Safety and Public Protection Committee.
Good evening. Welcome to the Community Safety and Public Protection Committee. And I think without further ado, will we invite Scottish Fire and Rescue to join the meeting and perhaps give a brief overview of the paper they're presenting tonight.
Thank you very much, Convener. Before I ask members to scrutinise and question the content of this report, I'd just like to take members to page 27 of the report. That is Appendix 1. Both locally and nationally, we're seeing an increase in accidental dwelling fires and some serious accidental dwelling fires. This was seen early in the pandemic, and what we launched this campaign to really support and tackle these and support these vulnerable people and make them as safe as possible in their home. Without taking up any more of your time, I'm more than happy to take any questions on the report from members.
Yeah, well, I think Charlie, Councillor Malone, sorry, has indicated he wishes to speak. Or is that relevant to this one? Sorry, Councillor Malone. Bailey McPherson.
Thanks very much, Convener. Could I first of all, and I'm sure join with everybody else in thanking the Fire and Rescue for all they've done during a challenging time. And my question is in respect of page 21 of the substantive numbering of the committee agenda. And it's in relation to automatic fire alarms and reducing unwanted fire alarm is going off, which is something that members of the committee will be aware I've asked about on a number of occasions in the past. And I really want to praise Gordon and his colleagues for the substantial progress that they've made, because as we can see from the statistics this time, we see that the number of these is a third lower than the 3-year average and 29% reduced on the previous year, which is very substantial progress. And I think very important because quite clearly any blue light emergency call out to something that ends up being actually an error, an unwanted signal, is time spent that could have been spent actually on a real emergency. So I'm very grateful to Scottish Fire and Rescue for the effort they've put into tackling this. But my question to Gordon is really in relation to how do we, how does Scottish Fire and Rescue retain this better number and in fact reduce it further? Is it all about engagement with duty holders at particular premises and education of those that are running particularly houses in multiple occupation, halls of residences, large residential establishments and so on? And I'm just really grateful to learn how this vastly improved performance in this respect can be maintained.
Thank you very much. Moving forward, we have undertaken a significant engagement internally with our staff to ensure that we have a concerted approach within this area and to work with the building occupiers to drive the UFAS calls down as low as possible. We are starting to see, as buildings reopen from lockdown, that there is a rise in unwanted fire alarm signals, and we're looking to support businesses as they open up and re-establish themselves to minimise this still further. In addition to that, we have a number of national projects ongoing and some of the learnings that that project is taking nationally have come from the work that's been undertaken by the team in Dundee to identify how we can make those improvements. But we will continue to engage with our partners to get this as most practical.
I'm grateful for that. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Bailey Wright, I believe, wants to ask a question.
Thank you. I wasn't quite sure if you had received my ask for the question. Didn't think it had worked. But my question is on item 2, 4.3, priority 1, improving fire safety at home. And I'd also like to link it into the accidental dwelling fires. On 4.3, I know you do a great job visiting vulnerable older people when you're assessing their homes. I had a recent case in my ward where the fire was fatal. So I'm keen that the very good work that you're doing is stepped up to avoid fatalities in the future. So my question is really, how has COVID affected your progress in this case, and how do you intend to try and catch up?
During the COVID response, what we did was try to reduce the number of face-to-face engagements our staff had with members of the community, just to prevent us and the others spreading coronavirus. What we have done is, during the initial the period during the highest risk, we reduced the number of home fire safety visits. However, we did continue to undertake, first of all, a phone call process where everybody that was on our list, we tried to make a phone call and offer that reassurance. We would also check is that they had the appropriate fire safety measures in place, smoke detectors and so forth. Anyone who didn't have that in place, we would send our staff out, ensure they wore the correct PPE to then ensure that smoke detection was fitted. As and when the risk is gradually reduced through our community, we have slowly increased the number and the people we will be going out to visit, and that really targets those that are most vulnerable. But what we've done is, through the telephone conferences, through these discussions, we haven't closed those contacts, but we've kept them open, and we will offer a face-to-face visit with all people on our list as and when it is safe and as and when they wish us to come into their houses. Moving forward, this will give us quite a large number of outstanding home fire safety visits. We have programmes in place just to ensure we will prioritise them on a risk-based approach and make sure as many of the people have as much information as possible. And again, we'll continue to target those of the greatest risk with the greatest support.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, is there anyone else with a question right now for fire and rescue? I'm not seeing any other names coming up in the chat. Okay, then I think with that, is this report duly noted?
Great.
Agreed.
Thank you. Well, thank you for your attendance. So if we move on then to the Police Scotland quarterly report, and allow Police Scotland to briefly address their paper.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just very briefly touch on the format and template of the report. This report covers the first quarter against our new local policing plan, so members will recognise the familiarity of the report, but they'll also recognise that we have updated some of the control strategies, which is some of the measures we use against the new priorities that were agreed. And members will also note that we've added a new front page to the report to give a quick overview of performance but I would, as always, urge members to look past the figures when considering the content of the report. But happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, Bailey McPherson.
Thank you very much, Convener. And again, just as I did with Scottish Fire and Rescue, very grateful thanks to Police Scotland for all their efforts during what has been an extremely challenging time, I suspect, for policing in the city and more widely. I would like to, in particular, pay tribute to the fact that we have in the West End in Lochee a new police inspector, Inspector Thompson, who has been frankly exemplary. She was only in post a matter of weeks before the COVID-19 health emergency started, and throughout the time she has been absolutely exemplary at getting back to me with regard to any issues that have been raised, and I'm very grateful indeed to her and her colleagues for all their massively hard work in a challenging time. My question's in relation to page 49 of the substantive numbering of the report, and it's in relation to the domestic housebreaking figures, which have seen a substantial increase. And there is an explanation in relation to some COVID-19 restrictions and social distancing measures. But an increase of 62%, I think, is undoubtedly a worry. And I was just really wondering if Chief Superintendent Todd could give an indication as to how this will be tackled going forward. Frankly, some restrictions and social distancing is going to be with us, I suspect, for some considerable time to come. And that will continue to present a challenge for Police Scotland. And I'm just really wondering how Police Scotland's adapting to that to see that we can ensure that domestic housebreaking figures do not continue to increase.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. I mean, the impact of the lockdown, clearly this period of the report covers the significant lockdown when there were far fewer people out and about, rightly so, as they observed the requirements to stay at home. Our increase in housebreakings, of course, also relates to attempted housebreakings, which is 41 out of the 60 overall crimes. So I would urge our community not to falsely believe that these are all break-ins to their houses. However, they are still impactful on individuals, and whilst the numbers are a concern and the direction of travel is a real concern, they are consistent with our 5-year average and our good performance from last year we've been unable to repeat this year. And undoubtedly, as you've mentioned yourself, Councillor, COVID-19 plays into that to an extent. There is a complex landscape here in regards to some of our housebreakings. Clearly, it's an acquisitive crime intended in general terms to remove the property of another for the purposes of gain. We have seen a corresponding drop-off in the number of shopliftings that have occurred, and our assessment at this point in time is that some of the individuals who obtained goods by stealing are stealing from each other's homes. A number of the people that we've spoken to have been the victims of these crimes are non-cooperative with us, which makes it very difficult for us. And of course, with the lack of other members of the public out and about, rightly so, it means that the number of available witnesses to speak to becomes harder. But I would urge that the understanding that our investigations into many of these crimes continue, and our detection rate, whilst disappointing, again is close to our 5-year average. These are historically very challenging crimes to detect, but our numbers as it stands just now is a moment in time. Overall, this ties into issues we have across our city, in particular in some of the areas in your own ward, Councillor, around some of the violence that we have, antisocial behaviour, and of course that then ties into some of the issues we have around inequality and drugs. So we are increasing significantly the amount of proactivity that we're doing in key areas of the city to focus that effort on the areas of greatest need, with the intent of providing an improvement for a particular area and then moving that focused effort elsewhere within the city so we become more directed in particular areas. So rather than dealing with the HB's housebreakings as an isolated response, we're rolling it into the wider focus of criminality within particular areas, and we certainly expect and intend to reverse that decline in performance in that area.
Could I thank Chief Superintendent Todd and you convener for that? That's a very comprehensive reply and is very reassuring. I'm grateful to the Chief Superintendent for that.
Thank you, Bailey Macpherson. Councillor McCready.
Thanks very much, convener. I've got a couple of questions. Can I draw attention to the bottom of page 44, which talks about assaults and particularly assaults on police officers? I'm sure the committee will join with me in saying it's disgraceful that any police officer is assaulted, and I'm sure that your colleagues in fire and rescue, as we heard earlier, deserve our praise, and I'm sure along with ambulance service, NHS and other key workers, council workers as well, deserve our thanks for keeping us safe during the pandemic. So I just wonder, I hope every effort is being made to apprehend anybody guilty of assaulting a police officer. I just wonder if there's any other resources being put into that. And further to the question from Bailey Macpherson around housebreaking, I just wonder if there are any. I absolutely heard what was being said. And I get the difficulties of dealing with some of that, particularly at the height of the COVID pandemic, which we seem to have moved on a little bit from, and hopefully we'll continue to move on from. But I just wonder if Chief Superintendent Todd thinks that there's any more resource needed to be given to dealing with housebreaking in the city, so that we can effectively deal with that problem. Thanks, convener.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll take your last point first, if I may, regarding resource. Undoubtedly, you'll never find a divisional commander in the land that won't ask for additional resource. And we are given support. Geographically, we're in a strong position to pull support from other divisions across Scotland and also some of the regional and national assets. So I would assure committee that those resources are asked for as and when they're needed. I think for me, there's an element here around the confidence of some of the victims to step forward and to engage with us and provide us with the information that we might need to gather further evidence. So our focus just now, rather than on the number of officers being increased, is actually about increasing the confidence of the victims to be willing and able to speak to us, and in supporting them with whatever it is that's causing them to believe that they can't do that. So again, it's not just about the resourcing. I'll always ask for more resource, but that doesn't seem to be the challenge for this particular crime type. In regards to police officer assault, I'd like to just pause for a moment, and I'm incredibly grateful for that to be raised, Councillor McCready. It's an absolute disgrace when people assault police officers and other emergency service workers. I would just draw members' attention to the period of time during which these assaults have been recorded, that we were in the middle of the pandemic with hundreds and hundreds of people positive, and some of those individuals are spitting on police officers, trying to deliberately infect police officers. The result being, of course, that they then need to isolate from their families and be supported through the tension of what that might actually mean for them. The Chief Constable has made it clear he's provided a very clear commitment to his staff, both morally as well as legally. We have a duty to our staff to help protect them, and we're looking at what more we can do around training. So our officer safety training is being doubled to 2 days to give staff more skills, more capability, and particularly in some of our conflict resolution skills. And also we seek support of Crown, and the Crown Office have taken a number of the individuals I've just referred to on petition to sheriff and jury trials, which will be forthcoming in due course. So Crown treat the matter very seriously as well. So I'm grateful for council support around this one, because our staff are as anxious and as vulnerable as anybody else in society, but as I've often said, they run towards danger when we expect everybody else to run away. And the last thing I think we should ever accept is that it's part of the job to be assaulted. So thank you, Councillor.
Thanks for that.
Thank you, Councillor McCready. Councillor Scott.
Yeah, thank you, convener. Unfortunately, my colleagues have kind of stolen my thunder, the questions I was going to ask, but seeing as I've got a question up, I will ask Mr. Todd about it. Looking at the page 67, we're talking about drugs and the increase in drugs even during the time when there was a lockdown, which I think just shows the ubiquity of drugs availability in the city of Dundee. But I'm concerned about the issue of cuckooing, because this has come up now a couple of times in the reports, and it's obviously a growing menace across Britain. I'm just wondering whether Inspector Todd could say what he thinks about you know, the issue of cuckooing, and if he's concerned about it growing in Dundee, I mean, it's good to see that some people were found guilty in the narrative there. But is this an issue you see growing in future, and what can we do to stop that?
I think it's an issue that's with us now, unfortunately. To what extent, we're not entirely clear, but we do know that it's with us. For me, it's quite clear that we've always said, you know, as it stands just now, you know, the use of drugs is illegal, but my focus is on the vulnerability around that, and our focus for enforcement is around those that profit from the sale and supply of controlled drugs. And that's where my actions and the actions of the officers is being directed. The issue that the cuckooing presents is that it's absolutely taking advantage of vulnerable individuals in order to profit from the sale and supply. These individuals who are having their houses taken over and are either being required to or forced to deal drugs on their behalf is utterly unacceptable. We're a small city, and we know many people within the city. And again, it comes back to the confidence element of some people that come forward to us. And we're starting to build that. We have more and more engagement with people who have been cuckooed. They're quite open now to coming to us and asking for help and support, knowing that we will support them and not look to them as suspects in a crime, but instead being victims themselves. Our activity going forward, it's not a policing in isolation. We can't police our way out of this. We can't enforce our way out of it. It has to be a multi-agency approach, and we work very closely with the local authority, as you'd expect, and not just through the Drugs Commission work, but just in general terms with housing, with social work, with education, with all arms of the local authority to try and make sure that we understand the issues that are going on behind people's doors. Doesn't matter if that's cuckooing or if it's an adult or a child protection issue, and indeed then what is the best response to it. That said, we hold a monopoly in the enforcement side, and we will relentlessly pursue these people down, and we have had significant success in identifying some of these people and putting them in front of the courts and having them barred from even coming into Scotland. And that gives us a powerful tool to continue to police that. But it concerns me that we have these vulnerable people within our community that are being exploited, and we don't yet know the full extent of that, but we know it's here with us now.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chief Superintendent Todd. I mean, obviously it's a worry, and I'm glad that people are coming forward and actually reporting it when it comes, and hopefully this will galvanise others to do it, because we don't want to see this in our city, because it's an absolute disgrace, as you rightly say.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Councillor Duncan, followed by Councillor Dawson, followed by Bailey Wright.
Thanks, Convener. Just a quick question, I think, to the Chief Superintendent regarding page 61 and the you make reference to an increase in domestic abuse, which is something that over the last few weeks and months have raised with police officers and council officers. I suppose in a way, I'm going to ask you a bit of an impossible question, because my concern is that during lockdown, I'm of the suspicion that, you know, the victims of such abuse are going to have difficulty reporting it for obvious reasons. They can't get out of the house away from an abuser. And I just wonder what the police feel for the actual level of the abuse is compared to the reported level, because I simply have a hunch there's a lot more of it going on.
No, it's a very serious problem and a very serious question, and I thank Councillor Duncan for that, but it is always helpful when I'm asked a question I can't possibly answer. My honest assessment, and I think this is shared as a common truth, is it's an underreported crime. We know that as a fact. To what extent, we're not entirely sure, but we do know that the victims of domestic abuse will rarely come forward on the first occasion. So there's always been a concern that it's an underreported crime, and our focus at the start of the lockdown period, the risk that was going to be present within adult and child protection concerns that rest behind closed doors that we don't get to see, was evident to everybody. We maintained our full capability in that area of business. Many areas of business we stood down and we prioritised, not in that area of business. We maintained our full capability. We know that our colleagues in the local authority did likewise. We also put in place arrangements with a number of our victims where they were able to contact police through the use of text messaging services, so telephoning into the control room and only using codes on a keypad to raise concerns. And obviously, as always, there was a priority given to any call that did come in. So whilst the lockdown period undoubtedly present an increased risk, this wasn't a new risk. The matter is underreported at all times, and we need to continue to create the environment and the space that encourages victims to have courage to come forward and then ensure they have the support around them when they do come forward to see them through what must be an incredibly challenging period for them.
Thanks very much indeed for that, and I'm assured, as I have been before, to that the police and council officers, etc., continue to give this the highest priority. I did say at the beginning it's something of an unknowable that I asked you, and I wondered therefore if there has been any work done around the figures available here compared to elsewhere in Scotland, elsewhere in other parts of the UK regarding reporting.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't have those figures to hand, but the questions you ask are of high relevance to the Scottish Government as well. And nationally, these figures have been getting gathered in, particularly in regards to the number of referrals that have been made. So the number of times we believe there might be a risk and where the vulnerabilities are being raised from. So those have been gathered, and we've been using those, reading across them to see whether or not we're outliers, positively or negatively, and then using that as a way to perhaps refocus or reprioritise. My assessment as divisional commander is that we are not outliers and that we very much followed the trend across the country.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Councillor Dawson.
Thanks, convener. My question is in relation to the speeding measures. I'm obviously quite heartened to see the reduction across the area of 33%, which I suppose is in some respects no small thanks to COVID-19 with the lesser vehicles being on the road during the lockdown period. But I'm just wondering, obviously, with things now starting to go again for you, you mentioned in the report the campaign calendar. I just wondered if you can give us an indication of what that will involve. And also in relation to the new 20-mile-an-hour zones, which are springing up throughout the city. From personal experience, I think I can probably say that a majority of people are complying or at least taking their speed down, but there still seems to be a minority across, I'll use Douglas as the example because it's where I see it, who refuse to go anything less than 30, and in essence, I can quite often hear them speeding past my house at 40 miles and beyond. Just wondering in regards to that, what additional resource or help the police can give to sort of try and bed these in and make people know that they are there for good reason, and to try and stop some of this more boy racer mentality that will completely ignore 300 20-mile-an-hour signs that are painted throughout the entire ward.
No, thank you, Councillor Dawson. I'm going to ask Chief Inspector Dave McIntosh, the area commander, to come in on this one. He's had quite a lot of involvement, as we know, the concern that this matter raises, and so perhaps just ask him if he wouldn't mind speaking on behalf of what he's got planned locally within the area, please.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent. Councillor Dawson, in relation to the calendar, that's really just a sort of kind of measure to make sure that we're kind of addressing any of the areas of concern and can just plan it out to make the best use of resources. We're doing that in conjunction with sort of Greg Burns from the Road Policing Unit, but also sort of kind of part of the locality inspectors into our own sort of local plans. When I know Chris Both during the period was sort of kind of dealing with sort of kind of off-road scramblers, sort of bikes, that type of thing. So just to make best use of resources and to sort of plan it in. I mean, in relation to the 20-mile-an-hour kind of zones that have sort of kind of popped up, absolutely signage is there, and I know the local authority were sort of kind of leading on kind of some of the sort of PR for that, if you like, in the communications, and it absolutely be of an important sort of kind of part kind of to that. It was a question that were asked sort of kind of recently. But as you can appreciate, our enforcement for these type of things also aligns to sort of, unfortunately, some of the PSI stats. So what we'll do is look to make best use across the city. If we have an area that has got sort of 20-mile-an-hour zones and accident data suggests that we should be there, we will absolutely be there. And likewise, the same with the 30 or 40. So it's to take that sort of kind of balanced approach across the city. Obviously, road safety remains a sort of key issue to ourselves, and that's kind of how we would progress in that area.
Many thanks. I think the reason I asked the question is because generally, if you're not getting stopped for speeding, you're just going to continue to do it. I understand the KSI stats being previous convener of city development play an important role in deciding where do you put your measures, but I just wonder. I previously asked in this report for information to be given on the safety camera partnership and what their work was done and where they were out and patrolling and what they were catching. And I'm just wondering if with these zones being so new, we maybe had a role for the safety camera partnership to actually appear in places that it never used to before. Because I totally understand you guys are stretched. You know, you can't be in every 20-mile-an-hour street ensuring everybody is doing 20 miles an hour. But if these habitual speeders are seeing, you know, guys with the guns or the safety camera partnership out on the road occasionally, they're going to think twice. And I think, you know, KSIs, yes, they are important, but I also think that preventative measure, if you know what I mean, it could also be utilised a little bit more through the likes of the safety camera partnership, just to make sure that people know that if they are going to speed in these 20-mile-an-hour zones, they will get caught.
Councillor Dawson, I'll take that response. You know, the safety camera partnership, where it's located, is predicated upon KSIs, the killed and serious injury accidents. But your point around the preventative measure that the fear of being caught speeding should slow people down. So we do need to make sure that we patrol these areas at our discretion and make sure that if we've got a speed limit in place, that people can expect us to enforce that. Clearly, I can't do that all the time, and clearly I can't do that everywhere, but people should not believe that we aren't going to enforce them. We will.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Going to let Bailey Wright in, and then after that, Councillor Malone, who I think has something he wants to speak to also. Bailey Wright.
Thank you. Most of my questions been already answered. That's a problem. We've been last in the queue. But there is on page 49 one question that wasn't answered, and that is about the break-ins to care homes. And that is a concern to me because care homes you perceive to be very safe. So my question is, you know, how did it come about and how are they going to be able to stop it in the future?
Thank you, Councillor. I share your concerns. They're safe spaces where we put some of the most vulnerable people live, and they should and feel safe in there. It's a small number of care homes, but it demonstrates the cross-border nature of some of the criminality that we deal with. Council will note that we caught the people responsible and presented them to court, and the courts will deal with them as is required. We'll continue our patrols and our visibility, particularly on the rural roads that surround Dundee for travelling criminals, and make sure that we catch them and deal with them as is required.
That's good, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Malone.
Yes, I have an amendment. Has the amendment been circulated?
Convener will circulate the amendment now.
Thank you.
Convener, the amendment can now be seen in meeting chat.
Okay, Councillor Malone, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, please, Convener. Before I go into the reasoning behind the amendment, I would like to agree with Bailey McPherson and his comments about the Officer Thompson who's the Lochie and West End community officer. I've only had one chance to meet her, but I found her to be a very articulate, very dedicated and committed person to working with the community and helping resolve some of the issues that we are facing in Lochie and in the West End. Superintendent Todd mentioned antisocial behaviour and its linked to criminality, and I guess that's the basis of the amendment. Dundee City Plan sets out some bold aspirational statements, which I'm sure everybody's aware of, and I'm sure it's supported by everybody in this chamber, and it guides the activities of the council. As part of that, our stated vision, Dundee will become a vibrant city with a quality of life that will make people choose to want to make it their home. I kind of ad-libbed on that bit. Before I start, though, can I again thank Chief Superintendent for the contribution of his team in the Lochie ward for their ongoing challenging work in dealing with complex issues that citizens face. And I'm heartened by the recent announcement about the targeting of Lochie in particular as an area of more police activity to tackle some of the antisocial behaviour and particularly drugs problems that the area faces. I'd also like to extend my gratitude to the fire service personnel that place themselves at risk to ensure safety. Can I just set out that my motivation in this amendment is not to be critical of the reporting to this committee. I think I and several others have commented on the increased quality of reports and the more critical and analytical approach undertaken. And we've heard this tonight in some of the discussions, particularly around things like cuckooing and stuff like that. My motivation is to understand the more nuanced relationship and often overlap in antisocial behaviour. In my first contribution to this committee, I asked whether Tayside Police had sufficient resources to tackle domestic abuse, whether the disappointing detection rates for rape were a consequence of underfunding, and we received some assurances on that. Every act of criminal behaviour and fire raising are acts of antisocial behaviour. We all know this from our communities. The point of my amendment is that councillors, as councillors, we have an idea of the brilliant work our antisocial behaviour team is doing, mainly through our interaction with them on a case-by-case basis, yet a complete understanding of antisocial behaviour in the city is not apparent. Not all antisocial behaviour is reported to the police, and too often I've spoken to constituencies who feel let down by both the council and the police. Families, the elderly terrified and feeling prisoners in their own home. Mental health problems as a consequence of antisocial behaviour, illness, time off work, and relationship breakdowns. All of these things are consequences of antisocial behaviour. I think the amendment will provide greater clarity of the interface between the police and the antisocial behaviour teams. Spoke to people who have given up after decades of residence, pleading for a move. I'm sure every single councillor that's in this committee today will have experience of that. People who've lived in a house for 10, 20, 30 years, who, because of antisocial behaviour, have just given up. That behaviour can range from littering to violence to drugs and intimidation, excessive noise, inter-neighbour conflict, yet often it is felt that we forget that there are significant outcomes of this which affect the health and safety of our community. Timing of this amendment is not coincidental to the report, rather as a result of the significant increase in reporting of antisocial behaviour which I have experienced, and I'm sure which has been the experience of others in the chamber. And it's having a direct consequential effect on the lives of people in our communities. Some of the things reported to me break your heart. Young mother threatened by people in the tenement block looking for drugs. Doors kicked in. Security buzzers pressed continually through the night as people seek entry. Blood spattered stairwells. Urination, threats of violence and intimidation. Drugs, unfortunately, are too often central to this narrative. These have resulted in significant impact, as I said, on health and community cohesion. That's why I'm calling for additional information to come before this committee. This is at the heart of community wellbeing. As Superintendent Todd has mentioned, COVID has clearly exacerbated this problem, particularly in relation to detection rates. A community already anxious about safety does not need antisocial behaviour. It can be argued that much of the reportage of Tayside Police deals with antisocial behaviour, but not at all. It could be argued that my amendment may lead to double counting, but how can we as councillors reviewing data assure ourselves that we understand the true scale of antisocial behaviour in our city? How do we reassure ourselves that the brilliant work being carried out by the antisocial behaviour team is both recognised, but more importantly, resourced adequately? How do we reassure ourselves that adequate funding is available to the team? how do we plan strategically to tackle antisocial behaviour? City, as I said at the start, has a bold aspiration to make Dundee a place people want to come home. I do, we all do. Every officer, every councillor, and I dare say every citizen believes in that aspiration. The aspiration to become something that's realisable. In order to do that, we need to do everything we can to deal with the scourge of antisocial behaviour, a scourge that's having a direct impact on the health of our citizens and the coherence of our communities. I would actually be interested to hear from other councillors of their experience. Do they chime with mine? That before and during lockdown, the cases of antisocial behaviour have increased, not just in terms of quantity, but in terms of intensity. I hope the Chamber will recognise this is not a criticism of anyone. The area of antisocial behaviour is a truly difficult one. My intent is to give support to those doing the groundwork on behalf. In order to do that, I think we need a clearer picture, a clearer examination of antisocial behaviour as reported, not just to the police, but to the antisocial behaviour team and neighbourhood services. And on that basis, I would seek to move the amendment.
Well, I have no issues with that, Councillor Malone. I concur with you. I mean, as you rightly point out, antisocial behaviour is a blight on our communities across the city. It's no respecter of ward boundaries. Now, I know Bailey Wright wanted to second that. I don't think we necessarily want to do it formally. I don't know Bailey Wright, but I think Chief Superintendent Todd
Yeah, I
also
would prefer
wanted
to do it formally if you don't mind.
Okay. Did Police Scotland
yeah, I'm
want
happy
back
to
in, though, Chief
second,
Superintendent?
Sorry?
Sorry, I thought the Chief Superintendent was wanting back in first, just before you spoke, but he maybe did not.
Well, the amendment has been moved. It needs to be seconded.
Yeah. Okay, Bailey Wright, on you go.
Okay. Right, I'm certainly happy to second this amendment. Antisocial neighbourhood problems in my ward have certainly escalated since COVID-19 and the restrictions of having to isolate. We need to tackle crime and antisocial behaviour citywide, and I know that the police in my area have increased their presence in the hill town. But in the Maltese, not only have people been stuck in their homes with the stresses that can bring, some are now also afraid to leave their homes due to the violence, the threats and the intimidation that they've experienced and also witnessed. I've had a report of one case where someone was threatened with a shotgun and others where they were threatened with knives. Now, people are experiencing noise nuisance and fighting that keeps them awake at night. Others have reported to me that the situation is seriously affecting their mental health. Now, the fear of going out adds further intolerable stress to people also experiencing domestic violence, which has become even more acute during this time. And I would like to see domestic abuse added to the reports that come to us. There has been an increase in domestic violence incidents, and I can only imagine how these vulnerable women and children are feeling. Some of the stories that I've heard have been simply horrendous, with people suffering in silence. One elderly tenant told me that they experienced regular hostility and was even told not to come into the lift by someone they perceived as a drug addict. Now, this is a stressful environment for anyone to live, and the police have pointed out that the effect of antisocial behaviour can be more significant in more confined areas. But there are many vulnerable people, many elderly people living in the Maltese, people with young families. Such people were once proud to actually live in the Maltese, but now they want to leave at their earliest opportunity, especially if the problem can't be resolved. I think the problem has to be addressed as a matter of urgency, and the reports will certainly help to join efforts to find a solution. We can't have young families with children frightened to go in and out the multi. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey Wright, for that. So, does anyone else wish to come in? Otherwise, I'm happy just to accept that and discuss the reporting of it in due course.
Kevin, the Chief Super's indicating he wants to come back in.
Yep.
Chair, I apologise. I mean, I
Superintendent?
appreciate. Thank you, and I defer to the committee's democratic principles to how they approach this, and I'll listen intently to the outcome. The only question I have is that myself and my Chief Inspector don't have sight of that motion, and whilst that's not critical for your considerations, it might have been helpful for me to know what it was that you were asking us to do, so that it was within the art of the possible. What I have heard so far ranges right across a range of activity, which causes me some concern as to how we manage to distill that down to a meaningful product that allows for enhanced and continued scrutiny. I know we already provide domestic abuse data, and if we've members of the public being threatened with shotguns, that's not a antisocial behaviour issue in the slightest. That's a significant crime that requires a very dedicated and specialist response. So pulling all these into a report, respecting I haven't seen the motion, does give me a real cause for concern as to my capability and capacity to do that, because it seems as though we're talking about all crime within the city.
Well, there's another couple of members wishing to comment, and I'm just taking them in the order I'm seeing them. So it's Bailey Keenan.
I mean, I think quite wrongly, Mr. Todd's been left, not unable to see in the chat and see the content of the motion. But I think the sentiment of the motion that you've agreed to, convener, is really around us as councillors getting the level of data that reflects what's going on within the antisocial behaviour team. I think we're all experiencing an increased level of antisocial behaviour and an increased level of frustrations of constituents as they try to deal with the antisocial behaviour. Obviously, we're in a position where there's no evictions at the moment, and it would be good to have an understanding of antisocial behaviour across the city as we move forward. So, I don't suppose there is a great deal of onerous content within the request for the police. There is probably more of a content in relation to antisocial behaviour team.
I was going to ask Mr. Menny if he could read that amendment, and he has kindly preempted that by offering to do so. And after that, Councillor Malone also wanted in, as did Elaine Sverlin. So if we let the motion be read first, and then we'll start letting people come in.
Thank you, convener. And with apologies to Chief Superintendent Todd and Mr. McIntosh, the amendment reads: request that reports to the Community Safety and Public Protection Committee are augmented with a report on antisocial behaviour as reported to the Antisocial Behaviour Team and Neighbourhood Services. The report should detail the instances of antisocial behaviour by ward and the number of orders served and any other sanctions. By way of explanation, I understand that this information would be produced by Mrs. Verline and her staff rather than Police Scotland.
And I'm going to let Elaine in at that point, if I may.
Thank you, convener. I just wanted to say that in principle we have no problems at all with providing committee with more information in relation to antisocial behaviour. What it would be good if we could have some time just to look at the information that we gather and put that together into a report and bring that back to committee to show committee what information we hold, and if there's information that we don't hold, how we manage to secure that information so that we can advise committee in due course. So the principles I think are absolutely acceptable. I'm sure that we can do something for committee, but it would be good to have a little bit of time just to prepare a report back on the detail.
Thank you, Elaine. I mean, it is important that we get it right. Councillor Malone, you wanted to come back in at that point?
Yeah, very, very briefly, convener, and thanks, Elaine, for that contribution. I think that's in line with what I was trying to do through the motion. What I wasn't trying to do was say to Police Scotland, the Tayside Police, we want even more information about criminality. Rather, what we were looking for is bringing together two streams of investigation of antisocial behaviour, one through the police and one that's as reported to the antisocial behaviour team and neighbourhood services. So it wasn't an attempt to give you guys more work. As someone who's just been through a significant quality assurance audit and not the greatest fan of report writing, however, I just think that our communities we need that information to see what's going on in our communities and make sure that the police and the antisocial behaviour team are resourced sufficiently to tackle what seems to be an escalating problem as we've seen through lockdown. So it wasn't an attempt to increase the workload for Police Scotland.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Malone. Hopefully then, with the added clarity there and the comments of Ms Verlin, we can accept that motion and then agree to note the report.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. And before Police Scotland and Fire and Rescue, I just want to really reiterate the comments made by fellow councillors about the work that you both have done, your organisations have done during this unbelievable, stressful period for everyone. And, you know, with our, this committee's grateful thanks, hopefully you head off tonight. Thank you. Okay, so we now swiftly move on to item 4, which is the completion of public space camera and network upgrade phase 3. Are there any questions on that? And I see nobody raising a hand or putting a little chat comment in. So is that report agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Well, thank you for your attendance.
Lord Provost, members of the Council, the next meeting is Neighbourhood Services Committee.
Item 1, declaration of interest. Are there any declarations? Item 2, external wall insulation home energy efficiency programme for Scotland 2020-21 programme. You have this for approval.
Thank you, Arlene. I don't intend to say much. This is another good news story. It's part of our ongoing external wall insulation programme, which will improve the energy efficiency of another 274 council and privately owned flats in the Foggylee and Appin areas, if approved. So, does anyone have any comments or questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay, carry on.
It's mainly covering the heaps. The external wall insulation programme, as you say, has been very successful initiative, and that has benefited many people throughout the city, and including our ward. It has made a significant contribution to our commitment to tackling fuel poverty and the climate change crisis, and it's good to see the programme continuing. However, other measures such as double glazing are also important, and the owner-occupiers have asked me if there are any plans to carry out further double glazing works and if any grants will be made available to owner-occupiers. We saw in the paper fairly recently the Chancellor of the Exchequer announced the Green Homes Grant Scheme, which will give £5,000 to homeowners in England and Wales for improvements, including double glazing, and they're offering 10,000 for people who are in lower income households. My question is, will any comparable be available to Dundee people that do not qualify for the Warmer Homes Scotland scheme, either through HEAPS or any new Scottish Government initiative? And also, in addition to being consistent with our fuel poverty and climate initiatives, I really think that it could be another initiative that would help stimulate the economy and create more jobs.
Okay, thank you, Bailey Wright. I'll ask Mr Simpson if he would like to come in on that. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, convener. We apply the HEAPS money to the greatest benefit we can in the city by applying it to the tenemental stock, as Bailey Wright has outlined. That has seen thousands of tenemental properties improved through use of this money and improving fuel energy efficiency and reducing fuel poverty. In terms of owner-occupiers, Bailey Wright is correct that there is a separate pot of HEAPS money that the Scottish Government sets aside for owner-occupiers specifically, and that is through Home Energy Scotland. So at the minute, our plans are to continue to invest for the greatest benefit for the city, which is largely at the minute still targeted at the tenemental stock, which makes up 75% of council stock.
Thank you, Mr Simpson. Bailey Wright, do you want to come back?
Come back. Really, for years, the money has been going into the cladding, and I'm just wondering if there's anything in the future going to be done for double glazing.
Mr Simpson.
Thanks, convener. At the minute, we haven't finished the cladding programme, so there are still tenemental stock within the city that need to benefit from a very effective way of improving energy efficiency. We haven't got any plans at this moment to be setting some of the money aside for double glazing for owner-occupiers.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to come in on that? No, I'm not seeing any other questions. Can that report be agreed? Thank you.
Agreed.
Agreed. Arlene?
Item 3, multi-storey development, planned maintenance works. You have this for approval.
This report details planned maintenance works in our multi-storeys. We're already installing further heat, fire and CO2 detectors in there, and we plan to put in new fire doors on landings and new front door sets for individual flats. In addition to the fire improvement works, we're going to do floor coverings and communal areas to be renewed, and all the landings and common areas will be repainted. We also propose that the bin chutes in the multi-storey buildings be decommissioned and replaced with alternative external waste disposal provision, which is in line with the city's waste management strategy. So you have the report before you. Looking to see if there's any questions. Richard McCready.
Yeah, thanks very much. Can I just ask about, you just mentioned it, paragraph 5.17 about external facilities for rubbish. I just wonder if there'll be if any thought has been given to tenants who may have some difficulty in carrying their rubbish any distance, who might have been able to deal on a more piecemeal basis with stuff within the chutes, whether there'll be any and who in other circumstances may have benefited from an assisted collection. Is there any thought being given to what might happen in those circumstances, which I get might not be huge, but I just think it's important that everybody is covered. Thanks, convener.
Yeah, thank you. I asked the same question. I'll ask Mr Simpson to come back in there again.
Thanks, convener. Our intention, if approved tonight, would be to get in principle approval to shut the chutes within the multi-storeys. Obviously, this is a big task and there's a lot of work in the other part of the report about planned maintenance. That means that the work will be done on a whole multi-basis. So I suppose in essence what I'm saying is that there isn't a decision tonight, then all the chutes shut tomorrow. So we have time to go out on an area by area basis, on a multi by multi basis, and work out what the specific needs of the tenants in those blocks are. I appreciate Councillor McCready's comment that it might not be a lot of people, but it is important that we take on board the views of those that live in the multis, but against the backdrop of a decision, hopefully, to close the chutes and look for other ways of disposing and recycling of refuse.
Yeah, thanks, convener. That's very helpful because I mean I think obviously fire safety is the top priority, and I think that's important. But I think maybe if we can be kept in the loop on that by Mr Simpson and his colleagues, I think that would be helpful.
Thank you. Councillor Malone, looking to come in, and I also have an amendment from Councillor Flynn. So if we take Councillor Malone's comment first.
Yeah, it was to welcome the investment in the multis. The multis in Lochee have been badly needing that investment, so the report's welcome in that sense. I was actually going to just ask something similar to Councillor McCready, in that what we've had is experience in the Hilltown, I believe, where the shoots have been out of action for considerable lengths of time, and what the feedback was from the people who are resident in the multis about their experiences of having to make alternative arrangements for waste disposal with the shoots out of action.
Mr. Sanson, do you want to come back in?
Yes, thanks, convener. Yes, we are aware of some areas around the city where from time to time chutes become damaged and have to be out of commission. I'd like to reassure committee tonight that in those cases we haven't seen dumping taking place. We haven't seen people just abandoning their rubbish. We do accept totally, though, that by talking to individuals in these blocks, we've got to work out what the specific needs are in terms of alternatives, and working closely with our colleagues in environment about locations of recycling points will take us forward, I suggest.
Thank you. If you're okay, I'll ask if Mr. May could possibly read out the amendment that's just been put in the chat, just in case anyone can't see it. If you could do that, Mr. May.
Thank you, convener. The amendment in Councillor Flynn's name reads as follows: that officers will carefully monitor the first of the multi-storey developments to have the bin chutes closed and look to make any improvements necessary before moving to the next phase and any further closures. Thank you.
I would be happy to accept that amendment because I think it addresses just a couple of comments that we've had just there in the chat and the two councillors. So would everybody be happy with that amendment? Is there any other comments anyone wants to make? If not, I'd be happy to take that and move the report. No comments? Okay, can that report be agreed then?
Great. Agreed.
Thank you. Arlene?
Item 4, tenders received by Head of Design and Property. You have this for approval.
Again, you have the report in front of you. It's some more monies to be spent on a range of roof replacement, boiler replacement, and heating, kitchen and bathroom upgrades. There's also, we're looking for approval for footpath improvements in the Lilybank area, the demolition of some lockups, old lockups at Devon Crescent, and further step improvements at Daffield multi-storey flats. I have Councillor Bailey McPherson, sorry, question from yourself.
Yeah, thanks, convener. All welcome. My question is in relation to Appendix 1, which relates to the boiler replacements. My question really is around, there are two parts of my ward which I'm greatly welcome will benefit from these boiler replacements. In the case of one, which is effectively a block of properties of similar age with similar age of current boilers around Fife Street, Mitchell Street and Benvey Road. My question really is what the rationale is for those blocks that are not actually included, because only one block in Mitchell Street out of 5 is included, and if I think of the squarey of similar properties, there would be 2 at the top end of Pole Park Road which are not included as well. And as I say, properties of similar age and similar age, I suspect, of boilers. I think of the ones that I've mentioned that aren't included, I think there might be one wholly owner-occupied block, but the rest certainly aren't. And I was wondering, I don't expect an instant answer, but I was wondering if all officers are able to come back to me and indicate to me why some are included and effectively some are not.
I'll defer to Mr. Simpson again.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back on that, convener, back to Bailey McPherson.
That's appreciated. Thanks, David.
Okay. Not seeing any other comments or questions. Can that report be agreed? Yes. Thank you. Alan?
That takes us to the confidential part of the agenda. Do you wish to deal with this in the usual way?
Is everyone happy with that?
Agreed.
Thank you. That concludes the business.
Lord Provost, members of the Council, the next committee is the Policy and Resources Committee.
Thank you, Roger. Welcome to Policy and Resources. Obviously a meaty agenda, but the first 11 items are things that we've all previously agreed, so it should be straightforward. So I'll just hand over to Committee Services to run through the first item.
Okay, first of all, are there any declarations of interest?
I'll take it as a given that members of the Leisure and Culture Board will have an interest in the Leisure and Culture item, and members of the IJB will have an interest in the IJB item. Any others? Okay. No.
Okay, that then takes us on to reporting that requests have been received for deputations to address the committee relative to item 14, COVID-19 recovery plan, and item 18, L&CD COVID-19 financial overview. Do you agree to hear the deputations?
I think I should ask if anyone is otherwise minded, and I don't think anybody is. So we will move on. I intend on taking the item straight after the deputation, just to ensure that we've got a flow to the meeting. So item 14 I'll take first, which is obviously in respect to the recovery plan. So welcome to Martha Stewart, who is representing the Dundee Action Forum. Martha, thank you for your attendance and your patience so far. You have 7 minutes with which to speak to committee, and then I'll invite questions from members at that point. So over to you, Martha.
Thank you very much. Good evening, committee and convener. My name is Martha, as was said, and I'm here on behalf of the Dundee Action Forum to represent the 80-strong group of Dundonians who last week attended our online People's Assembly on a green recovery for Dundee. Thank you for giving me some of your time tonight. I really appreciate you have a long agenda with many pressing issues that need your attention. But if I may be so bold as to suggest that what I have prepared to speak with you all on tonight is the most pressing issue which faces our community here in Dundee and people all around the world. That is the climate and ecological emergency. It is from within the context of this emergency that we must view COVID-19, a devastating and shocking crisis on top of the even bigger existential crisis of climate change from which it emerged. Indeed, your own climate risk and vulnerability assessment asserts the high likelihood in a short period of time of damage to infrastructure, increased flooding, water scarcity and drought, food shortages, increase in illness, disease and death, increased demands on the NHS. The list goes on and on. And indeed, we have seen in just the last few weeks the tragic rail deaths in Aberdeenshire, where in the space of just 4 hours, 70% of Aberdeenshire's expected monthly rainfall in August hit the ground. We saw Fife declare a major incident due to flooding, and in the last few months too, the Greenland ice sheet has melted beyond the point of no return. Yet despite these harrowing realities and the many negatives and trials of these past few months, it has also been a time of great strength, resilience and positive change. Communities have rallied stronger than ever, biodiversity has flourished, pollution and emissions have substantially decreased, cycling uptake has risen exponentially, and so many have a renewed appreciation for the nature and wildlife surrounding them. Only 9% of Britons want life to return to normal, wishing instead to embrace the unique opportunity that crises present us with to remake society for the better. If we are serious about recovery, then we need to capitalise on this momentum and set out an ambitious vision for a greener future. What such a vision might look like was precisely what was discussed at the People's Assembly, where we gathered to learn, listen and deliberate on what a green recovery should look like for our vibrant city. We were joined in the first evening by an expert panel of speakers, which included doctors, politicians, community leaders and activists who spoke on varying aspects of the climate and ecological crisis. The second night, we took these ideas and formed what we thought should be included in the Council's recovery plan, which was released last week. It was reassuring to see that the recovery plan recognises the environment should be a key consideration during the next phase. And I quote from page 7, "The COVID crisis has driven demand for a lasting green recovery and one that ensures long-term environmental benefits and local resilience to future shocks. Yet, despite this valuable recognition, the specific actions detailed in the plan hardly feature the environment at all. With around 250 priorities set out, only 5 have any direct positive relation to sustainability. It is clear that the strategic will for a green recovery is not effectively translating into policy. Not only that, but the recovery plan indicates that several sustainable initiatives are at risk. Instead of reaffirming the commitment to the climate and biodiversity plans, it seems that these have been identified as areas at serious risk of under-resourcing at a time when they are most needed. Many of the People's Assembly's proposals are reflected in those plans. They include the establishment of an integrated and improved green corridor system across our city, enhancing biodiversity, support for community gardens, focus on sustainable transport, establishing an extensive, permanent and ambitious cycling system, maximising recycling and reuse activities and minimising waste, mass energy efficiency and fuel switching programmes. Of course, our Assembly would go further and urge the Council to set targets and timescales for the actions in the Climate Action Plan. The Council has declared a climate emergency and progress has certainly been made, including the development of the Climate and Biodiversity Action Plans. Yet not one of these documents are mentioned or reflected in the COVID-19 recovery priorities. This is a significant missed opportunity. We urge that now is the time for Dundee City Council to lead and set a visionary, truly green approach to recovery. Seize this opportunity, build on the momentum for change that people have asserted, mitigate the risk of what is to come, and safeguard us all against further crisis. We ask you, firstly, reassert the climate and ecological emergency. Secondly, reaffirm commitment to and accelerate the Council's climate action and biodiversity plans, strengthening them with accountable, specific goals, targets and timescales. Thirdly, revise the restructuring phase of the current recovery plan to include specific environmental and ecological goals. Fourthly, ensure that no action within the recovery plan puts any aspect of the climate and biodiversity targets at risk. And lastly, build on existing mechanisms for ongoing engagement and collaboration with the Assembly and Green groups to progress jointly on the green recovery proposals. Now is the time to establish Dundee as an international leader in green recovery, building a truly sustainable future for all of our citizens. I thank you all for your time and I hope you will support our proposals. If you have any questions, I'm happy to hear them. I also have a few Assembly members and Andrew from Friends of the Earth here to help me with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martha. You stuck exactly to 7 minutes, so very impressed by your timekeeping skills. Can I thank you for your contribution? Thank you for your email that you sent round to all of the members as well. I was disappointed to not be able to attend virtually the meeting last week. Unfortunately, I had to be called away to other things, although it was my intention to join proceedings. But certainly from the feedback that I've received from colleagues and from others, it was certainly very well received and a lot of positivity in terms of the way in which we can take forward that broader agenda. I did email you earlier today. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that, but just to give you that reaffirmation, I can't even speak right now, that we are absolutely committed to the agenda. And I think partly in answering your question, I would just draw to your attention the fact that there are dedicated reports that are due to come to committee and within a matter of a couple of months, which are specifically addressing the issue of the ecological and environmental crisis that we've all acknowledged and certainly the Council has acknowledged. So there will be specific reports that are coming forward that will address some of that. Perhaps it isn't contained within this report, but that's because it's consumed and collated with other information that is very specific to that agenda. And just last week, I met with officers to discuss that. So to give you that reassurance that the report before you is not the sum total of our ambition or our efforts, there is much more that you will see within the weeks and months ahead that will, I think, go some way to address some of those issues that you've mentioned. But I will allow other members to come in. So I think Councillor Keenan, Kevin Keenan.
Yes, thanks, Convener. Convener, it was really just to make a comment to start with. You, in your opening remarks at the Lord Provost Committee earlier, you mentioned how cross-party we've been working well together, and that being every political party has, had its role to play in making sure that the city was kept safe. And I think with that intention, this report and the work the officers have put in to bring it here has really got to be recognised. It's a very deep and wide-ranging report because it's got so many areas to look at in the recovery of our city. The Labour group, as I indicated at a leaders meeting to yourselves and other leaders, has some proposals of its own. And I think this report leaves it open for us to have that level of discussion. I believe that we will be in a position shortly to share that with other leaders. And I hope that it is received well, because it's well intentioned, because I think it's about the difficulties that our city faces and how we look towards creating the wealth within the city that retains jobs and develops other jobs for people within it. Within that report, obviously, there is a green agenda.
Kevin, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt your flow, but do you have a question for Martha, or are you moving on to your...
I indicated, Convener, that I had a comment to make, not a question to ask.
Just checking. Thank you.
Okay. So, whilst you have an amendment of your own, I hope that we can see cross-party to support that. I'm hoping that at some stage we'll be able to share our version of a recovery and see how best we can take that forward together in the best interest of the city.
Okay, thank you for that contribution. Can I just check, Bill Campbell, is your question in relation to Martha's contribution or just broader?
Yeah, it's a question to Martha.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that okay to go ahead?
Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, can I ask Martha or any of the deputation to say anything on the potential for the alarming rise that could come from the Greenland ice sheet? I kind of knew about this, and I heard you say it today about methane being released from sediments, which is an alarming amount of carbon, greenhouse gas going into the atmosphere. Can you say anything on the methane potential release from the ice sheets melting?
I personally would not be in a position to speak to that, but possibly my partner Andrew from Friends of the Earth might be able to come in there and enlighten us a bit on that. Andrew?
Thanks, Martha.
Sorry, I'm passing the buck there.
There are several aspects of climate change which have these effects where you get a reinforcement of the warming, because the warming itself causes another aspect of the environment to change. So the melting of the ice sheets and the tundra in Russia, for example, that means that methane, it's a bit like the peat we've got in Scotland. When it's released to the atmosphere, it adds to the impact of climate change. Methane is a much more powerful but less long-lived greenhouse gas than CO2. So we really do need to be concerned about these kind of I can't remember what they call reinforcing cycles that are created by climate change itself. There's also a lot of gases which are trapped in places like the mouth of the River Amazon, and as the temperature rises, these are being released, and they will add significantly further methane to the atmosphere. So this is one of the things we can't predict is how quickly these things will kick in and speed up climate change, but it is something we need to be very concerned about.
Yeah, and certainly I would add into that a significant proportion of Dundee is on the coastline. As the ice melts, the sea level rises, and that puts a significant proportion of Dundee at risk to increase sea level rises. And I also just wondered if it would be possible to speak to on the last speaker that spoke in recognition of the wide-ranging points in the COVID report. We're really
Well,
asking.
sorry, Martha,
John.
sorry, this is just questions to you from elected members at this
Okay,
point.
no problem.
So, but thank you. I think you've made a perfect contribution, and obviously the email as well. So, Bill, did you want to come back with a question?
No, just very briefly. I was concerned with methane because of my interest in cosmology and the concern with carbon runaway greenhouse effects from methane. And also I've seen programmes with methane actually venting out of the ice sheets at the moment and something going up to them and lighting them up and flames coming up. I mean, it's quite a scary picture. So the ice sheets melting in Greenland is very, very concerning.
Yeah, I think we'd all agree with that point entirely. So I don't think there's any more contributions. Thank you both. Good to see you, Andy. Long time no see. I'll move on now. Bailey McPherson has indicated he's got a question to officers, so I'll take questions to officers first of all. Bailey McPherson.
Thanks very much, convener, and thanks very much to the deputation. That was an excellent deputation. My question's actually about 9.5 in the report, which is at page 115 of the substantive page numbers of the committee report. And it's in relation to the first point at 9.5, looking at funding. And as it indicates, during the recovery phase, working with COSLA and identifying cost pressures, and thereafter seeking additional Scottish Government funding and flexibility from 6 months post-lockdown to up to 3 years. Now, it's very clear if we look further forward to item 16, the very, very significant financial gap facing our council and indeed other local authorities across Scotland. And I was wondering if the Chief Executive could give us some indication as to where these discussions with COSLA are at the moment in relation to the funding issues, and also where this authority and COSLA as a whole is in terms of seeking additional government funding and flexibilities going forward.
Happy to ask the Chief Executive or perhaps Greg Colgan to comment on that.
I'll maybe start, convener, if that's okay. So thank you, Bailey McPherson. There is a substantive item on the agenda where Mr Colgan will take you through, I think, both the short, medium and longer term challenges facing the council. So at this stage, I think the intention in the COVID recovery plan was to deal with the immediate funding gap that the City Council is facing. So if you're in your hands, I'm happy to pass to Mr Colgan now. I think it might actually be perhaps better if Mr Colgan and I and any other officer that members wish to ask cover that during the substantive item on finance. Because I do suspect
are you happy with that?
But I'm in Bailey McPherson's hands on that.
I have no problem as long as it's covered. It's you know, semantics as to whether it's covered under item 13 or 16, or 14 or 16. So I'm quite happy, David, that it's covered at that point. The substantial, you know, the substantive issue is where are we getting to in relation to trying to achieve further funding and flexibilities from government, and I'm quite happy that it's you know, covered under item 16.
Thanks, Billy McPherson. It will be covered.
Okay, I'll move on. Bailey Sawyers, you wish to move your amendment?
Yeah, thanks very much, convener. I'm not sure if everybody has access to the amendment, which is in the chat room. Possibly the deputation don't. So I wonder if Mr Many or one of the committee clerks would be able to read it out, if that's okay.
Certainly.
Thank you, convener. The amendment in Bailey Sawyer's name reads as follows. Add the following recommendations under 2.1. E. Reasserts the commitment made by Dundee City Council to declaring a climate emergency, recognising the principal actions detailed within Dundee's Climate Action Plan as referenced in paragraph 8.5. F. Instructs the Chief Executive to bring forward a specific report updating the Policy and Resources Committee on progress and actions undertaken in respect of paragraph E above, including details of any and all emerging opportunities to accelerate progress against environmental targets. And finally, G, agrees that ongoing engagement is a key tool in progressing with recovery in all of its forms, and asks officers to engage with community groups who wish to support the city's environmental, social, cultural and economic recovery. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roger. Willie?
Thanks, Convener. I'm going to be pretty brief, given we've got our 26 items in the agenda after this. So,
very grateful.
Indeed. Whilst this is a very extensive report, nearly 80 pages long, it quite clearly can't cover every eventuality of what recovery from COVID might be across the city. So whilst it's extensive, it's not necessarily comprehensive, covering every single aspect. And as referred to in the amendment, we declared a climate emergency. Struggling to remember when that was. It was obviously pre-COVID, some considerable time ago. We've got the climate action plan. We're asking the Chief Executive to bring forward supplementary reports. And critically, I think, paragraph G in the amendment talks about engaging with the community and how we move forward, because it's quite clear, as Martha in our presentation said, that we can't just flick a switch. We wouldn't want to flick a switch and just go back to where we were back in February, and with all the problems that entailed in the way we worked and the way we lived and the way society went about things. So we have to be tailoring how we recover from this quite catastrophic event in a way that shapes a better society. And if anything good can come out of this, it's really looking at all our practices across both the City Council and our partner organisations and volunteers that we work with, and seeing, are there ways that we can reshape these? Are there ways that we can make things better going forward? And if there are, and undoubtedly there will be in many, many instances, let's see if we can seize that opportunity to change things and build a better society going forward. And that's me.
Thank you very much. Obviously happy to agree to the contents of the amendment, but Councillor Flynn, I'll let you in. Mark, are you there? I'm aware that Councillor Flynn was having some technical difficulties. He had to come in and out of the chat earlier on, but as I've said, I'm happy to agree to the suggestion. I don't think anybody would be otherwise minded, and look forward to getting an update on progress as we move forward, and obviously our report comes forward over the coming months. Yeah, Bailey Scott, I'll let you in, and then I'll move to the next item once this is agreed. So you're the last speaker. Bailey Scott.
Thanks, Convener. I have no problem with the amendment at all. The only thing I would say is that it's really difficult in this way of conducting committees to be able to speak to my colleagues to make sure that they're okay with the amendment. I'm sure they will be, and none of the amendments that have come up tonight have been contentious in any way that we could all support, but it might be useful if our committees are going on like this for a while, that if amendments like that could be shared in advance, so I can at least speak to my colleagues about it to find out what their views are on this, on these sort of proposals. I have a couple of questions though, and having read through the report, there's lots of plans and lots of objectives, but I think what the Dundee public want to see is the services reinstated. And some local councils, other local councils are ahead of us with that. And I have continued to get complaints from people about the food waste collections not being reinstated, the libraries still being closed. And I just wondered what the prevailing reason for us not being able to reinstate the services that people are looking for, whether it's still because of COVID guidelines, or whether now the principal factor as to why we can't provide the Dundee public with the full range of services again is now purely financial.
I'll ask officers to come in. I suppose you asked a very specific question in terms of one service, in terms of food waste. So can I invite Elaine, first of all, to comment on that aspect, and then perhaps the Chief Executive to comment more broadly on the point that you were making. And just to say on your first point, I agree, and I think we'll take that as a learning curve for this meeting. So thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Obviously, food waste collection is a priority for us, and it's something that we're actively looking at this point in time, looking at how quickly we can get the food waste collection back on stream. What we want to make sure is that we don't jeopardise any of the other services that we're currently providing. So it is very much, we need to make sure that we can absolutely cover all the aspects of the entire service, but I would hope that we'll be able to bring something back to elected members very soon in relation to the food waste collection.
And just on the broader point, it's perhaps something that we can pick up with the Chief Executive at our fortnightly leaders meetings and provide an update that can then be dispersed amongst the groups. But Chief Executive, do you want to comment on the broader point?
Yes, thank you, Bailey Scott, for the comment. I mean, we're operating obviously within the framework set out by the Scottish Government, and we're currently, as you know, in phase 3 of the roadmap for recovery. The second issue is you do rightly identify some of the financial challenges, and that is a significant contributory factor. And we'll obviously speak more to that in reports later on in the agenda today, as indicated. We're working closely in partnership with Leisure and Culture Dundee, because I agree with you. I think that citizens in Dundee want access to services as quickly as possible. Important to recall that, of course, some of them, indeed many of them, are in fact now open, and we're operating in a basis where we have to make sure that for our staff and for service users, that indeed they're still safe and we can deliver social distancing and all of the various other issues that are being required of us. And of course, it's important to recall that COVID isn't gone. The experiences of the last week in terms of Kings Park School, the Two Sisters Food Group and so on, I think have demonstrated that a phased approach and some caution is required in order to come out of lockdown. It's certainly harder to come out of lockdown than it was going into it. And I think the final point I would want to make is just to reassure all members of the Council and Bailey Scott in particular that we will be communicating, as I hope effectively as we have done with citizens of Dundee and with members, in anticipation of reopening services as far as possible. I think the intention is, well, I know the intention is subject to phase 3 and phase 4 of the Scottish Government route map, that we reopen on a phased basis all of those services that Bailey Scott referred to between now and, I hope, November. But I would stress the health warning on all of that, Convener, that is all subject to us being able to contain the virus and not have to take steps which other parts of Scotland have had to take in recent weeks.
Okay, thank you very much for that, David. Okay, as I said, Bailey Scott is the last speaker on that item. We've got a number of items to discuss tonight and want to give everybody the opportunity to ask relevant questions on that. So is no one otherwise minded? Okay, I'll take that item as agreed. Thank you. Tracy?
Sorry.
I think you've put yourself back on mute, Tracy.
Sorry.
It's okay.
That takes us to the second deputation, which is for Leisure and Culture Dundee COVID-19 Financial Overview Report.
Okay, I presume everybody's happy to hear the deputation unless somebody shouts now. Stephen Massey from the GMP is here to address committee. So Stephen, you've been here before, so 7 minutes, and I'll invite questions thereafter. So thank you, and thank you again for your patience.
Hopefully you can hear me, John. So thank you, Convener, obviously, for your time, and thank you for the councillors for hearing the deputation this evening. It's the advocate of any union to obviously advocate for its members. So we are concerned, obviously, with the report in front of you this evening, which is essentially a blueprint for the reduction in services, the reduction in headcount, and the potential closure of facilities across the city. COVID has been a unique situation. Certainly, leisure and culture isn't the only leisure trust facing issues. However, what we are seeing is a commitment here to essentially underfunding frontline services for mental health and wellbeing in the city. I think the COVID emergency has shown that leisure and culture has been operating at hand-to-mouth nature for the last few years, struggling to obviously adapt to an ever-changing marketplace in some respects in relation to competition elsewhere in the city, but also using precarious working methods with casual workforces, etc., being employed within vital frontline services within our city haven't helped. And I think the COVID situation has identified several of those kind of concerns. Staff members, as you will be aware, many of whom have been furloughed for the last few months, have had a degree of security in relation to payments coming into their homes. However, if you're a permanent member of staff, that has been the case. If you're not a permanent member of staff and you're a casual member of staff, it hasn't been so straightforward in relation to how the furlough scheme's been adapted or used locally to offset some of those costs. When we look at the additionality of what's been proposed, there is a sizable deficit. Certainly the JMB's call would be for some kind of national package from the Scottish Government, and I would hope that the City Council and Leisure and Culture would be writing to their colleagues within the Scottish Government, calling for that additionality to be brought forward. We are seeing a sizable investment put in through the UK Government and the Barnett consequentials of £97 million, but that's not affecting anything to do with the likes of the leisure and sports services in the city. That will cover arts and culture. So that, although we don't know what that framework will look like or what the proportion of those monies coming to Dundee will look like, I think something's needed in relation to the sport and leisure elements, which are the income generating elements of any leisure trust. So whether it be Dundee's, Fife's, Glasgow's, or indeed Aberdeen's. I think the nature of the beast is we're in a spiral of decline. I think transparency needs to be very much clear in relation to what the expectations are of leisure and culture moving forward. And the viability of the organisation is now called in question. Indeed, the paper in front of you identifies that there will be no essential cash, constraints available for the organisation to move in the next 2 financial years. As all the reserves or unrestricted reserves will be used in order to mitigate the circumstances around COVID. So the reality is, Mr. Convener, just keep things short and sweet. I know you've got a long agenda this evening, but the reality is, where do we go from here? What services or what will the services in the city look like? How will staff who have provided those services, and it was really reassuring to hear the Lord Provost at the start thanking both council workers and many leisure and culture workers who didn't go on the furlough scheme, but instead offered and propped up frontline services. How will their jobs be protected moving forward? I think this is a cuts agenda, and whether we want to say it is a cuts agenda or not, I will leave that to the politicians to debate. And the only viable solution will be if an investment package cannot be sought on a national level, will be to secure some kind of guarantee that the individuals who are currently working within the organisation will be brought back in-house under the council fold and the directive. Many of the systems and processes within that and the business elements are already harmonised with the City Council and its departmental structures. So the reality is, where there's a will, there's a way. And I think what we're looking for here today is there's a commitment to no job losses within leisure and culture moving forward. Certainly what you have in front of you would indicate that there will be job losses, potentially a reduction in services, and also a reduction in buildings are all being touted as possibilities in order to mitigate some of the COVID issues. But I think some of the fundamental issues that are found within the wide operational elements of leisure and culture. That's kind of my summary, Mr. Convener. So if there are any questions, I imagine there may very well be. I'm quite happy to take any questions from the elected members.
Thanks very much, Stephen, and thanks again for sticking to time. Yeah, the first question I see is from Councillor McCready. Richard.
Thanks very much. I've got a question for Mr. Massey. I mean, you mentioned in your deputation that one of the things you'd be looking for is a national package of support for leisure and culture trusts across Scotland. You'll note, I think, I'm sure you will have noted, that in the report at paragraph 5.3 it says it is therefore almost certain that additional funding, further significant savings, or both will be required for the substantial financial sustainability of the organisation, that's Leisure and Culture Dundee, for the next 1 or 2 financial years, especially since there are no unrestricted reserves to call upon after 2020-2021. I mean, is your understanding, like mine, that essentially most of the spending by Leisure and Culture Dundee is on wages? So any significant savings is essentially your members either terms and conditions or losing their jobs, and is that something that you think that the GMB would be prepared to support? Because certainly something that Labour Group would not be prepared to support.
Well, thank you very much for that particular question. So I do know as a former trustee of said organisation, you're probably in a slightly better position than I am when it comes to the budgetary requirements of yesteryear, but we shan't cover that. I think where a report states that it's 85% of the overall expenditure for any organisation is staffing costs, then the reality in order to balance a budget will be, sadly, the reduction in jobs. And from a trade union perspective, I'm obviously advocating on behalf of GMB Scotland here this evening. That's not acceptable. So, these people come forward. They have a vital role to play, in fact, in bringing the city out of whatever the pandemic's going to look like in relation to mental health and well-being, in library services and those support elements around that, and the welfare state, etc. So I think leisure and culture staff have got a key position to play moving forward. How that is developed when essentially the axe is hanging over their head, or the sword of Damocles, if you wish, if you may, isn't necessarily productive nor wanted in many respects, Councillor McCready.
Thanks very much, Stephen.
Okay, thank you. Can I just clarify? Right, sorry, George, just got your message there. Over to you. Question for Stephen.
Thanks, Convener. Stephen, you made mention in your deliberations there about the impact on casual members of staff. Could you maybe elaborate on how it affected seasonal and casual workers in leisure and culture with the furlough scheme?
Certainly, Councillor McKevin. Yeah, as I've pointed out, I'm in a very fortunate position in that I'm a full-time member of staff, so my contract is very stable. However, some of my colleagues haven't been so fortunate. So although they'd signed on to the furlough scheme believing they would receive 100% of a 12-month variable in relation to their wages, that is not what has transpired. So what has happened instead is a compensationary package is being developed around a 3-month average rather than a 12-month average. So, an example I would give without obviously breaching confidentiality of one of my members is they received something like £137 for the month rather than something nearer 600. So, that's been a burden on them, on their family, on their home position. And sadly, it's an indication that if we don't invest in good quality jobs in the city, then the reality is that precarious work, which we see predominantly in the private sector, but more so now in the public sector, Councillor McKevin, creeping in, but it provides no one with security. So, and essentially, if you build your foundation upon quicksand, then, don't be surprised when the building starts to sink. And the sad reality, if casual staffing are used in that respect, then, I don't necessarily think it's the best thing going forward. And certainly the GMB have advocated now for a continued number of years that those individuals should be made permanent members of staff. And sadly, that's fallen on deaf ears.
George, you've got a supplementary?
Thanks, Chair. Stephen, has this been a pattern of behaviour the GMB have witnessed across other industries?
Yeah, I would say it's not unique. So, and certainly, the influx of casual working within the public sector, George, can be seen right the way across. It doesn't have to be necessarily the leisure services or the cultural services. I think the reality is, though, we're trying to offer Dundee as a place to come, a vibrant city, and we need those public services and that confidence rather from the public and visitors in the city, in that we can provide services and good quality services. That's going to attract tourism into the city. It's going to allow people to go into facilities. And I think moving forward from that point of view is, if you haven't been paid correctly over the last few months, and then you're brought back in to work within an organisation, potentially not knowing what that future looks like, why would you give 110%? Your eye's going to be looking at an alternative job, if there is one in the city. And I think we've really missed the trick here in that, the reality is, if these people had secure jobs in the first instance, then, I'm not saying they wouldn't be motivated, they certainly will be, but it's an additional barrier removed from their home life. And things have been stressful for our members over the last few months, and we've certainly advocated that to leisure and culture on the variety of different board and liaison meetings we've had over that time.
Okay, thanks both. There's no other questions for you, Stephen, so thank you very much for your contribution. I've got a number of people indicating that they've got questions to officers, so I'll just move straight on to this item itself. Clearly, there's a number of items tonight that detail some extremely difficult financial situations in respect of Leisure and Culture Dundee, the council, the IGB, and the whole of the public sector facing one of the most challenging periods post COVID-19, hopefully, than we ever have seen. And I think the reality is that these reports are setting out the context so that both the public and elected members understand in great detail what that means and what the potential repercussions are if no action is taken at a national level to ensure that funding comes forward. So I'll move on. Fraser, you've got a question to the officers, and then Councillor Mara and Craig and Helen. So Fraser.
Thanks very much, Convener. My question's about recommendation 2.5, that Leisure and Culture Dundee have made a request for an advance payment of the Q4 management fee. Now, I've just noticed the administration group amendment, which I would hope we would be supportive of, which is to pay Leisure and Culture Dundee that advance payment, given the very significant cash flow situation. My question for officers, and perhaps Ms Dobby, is that will that enable, because we've got a very serious financial situation, frankly, facing Leisure and Culture Dundee, but will that easement of the cash flow, assuming committee is agreeable to that, allow the reopening of all facilities? There's a the last thing anybody wants to see is the loss of any community libraries or any other facilities across the city that Leisure and Culture Dundee manages. And I'm wondering if we are agreeable to, as I hope we are, to trying to help Leisure and Culture Dundee's cash flow. Can officers give an assurance, and can Leisure and Culture Dundee give an assurance that all these facilities will reopen in the time frame that the Chief Executive was talking about? I think he said, reopening facilities by November, and will that be possible?
Okay, thank you for your question. I'll ask Judy. Judy's on the call, so if you can respond, that'd be appreciated.
Thank you for the question, Billy McPherson. The schedule of reopening that Leisure and Culture Dundee has prepared in partnership with Dundee City Council is very much on schedule, and the financial projections that you see outlined in the paper are based on that. The request to have the management fee from the council for the final quarter advanced to us will enable us to continue trading till the end of November. But it's still, as you'll note from the paper, the financial deficit that we're experiencing is too great for us to trade out of. The ambition for Leisure and Culture is to reopen our services. We know our charitable purpose. As Stephen rightly said, we make a huge contribution in terms of mental and health and well-being and inclusion, but the management fee on its own isn't sufficient to address the deficit.
Okay, thanks for that.
Okay, thank you. Michael Mara, you were next, Michael.
Thanks, Convener, and thanks to Stephen for the deputation and for that question, Fraser. It's very useful. I think as a board member of Leisure and Culture, and I think somebody frankly reading this paper, it's quite clear to me that in the absence of the council stumping up the cash, as the director has just said, Leisure and Culture cannot continue to trade, and that when there's no money coming through the tills, that's the situation that we can the organisation faces. But I want to pick up specifically with officers, with Judy, perhaps also with officers of the council. Can you confirm that the terms and conditions of Leisure and Culture Dundee employees are consistent with those of Dundee City Council employees, including the no compulsory redundancy policy that the council holds? I've got a second one, if that's okay, Convener, but that one first.
Okay, I've got Janet on the call to ask from a council perspective, first of all, or Greg, perhaps.
Yes, no, I'm here.
Oh, Janet, you are here. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Mara, I can confirm that Leisure and Culture Dundee have identical terms and conditions of employment to Dundee City Council.
Thanks very much, Janet. And also, I think that I hope is some form of assurance. I know that Mr. Massey mentioned it in his submission, but that those terms and conditions remain the same, that the no compulsory redundancy policy is in place. So to follow on from that, It's my clear understanding, and I think we've been through this position before as a council when we've had discussions about the financial challenges that leisure and culture has faced in previous years, that any decision on services that should be stopped or that are to be curtailed should be taken by Dundee City Council as the organisation that's paying the management fee that essentially buys the services from Leisure and Culture Dundee. So I'm looking for that reassurance. That's my understanding, but I just want officers to be able to give that to the employees, but also to the citizens who have democratically elected us to provide those services for them.
David, can I ask you to come back on that point?
Yes, convener, happy to do so. So that is the position in the management agreement between Leisure and Culture Dundee and the City Council. I would make the point, I think, to Councillor Mara, that right from the outset of COVID, the management team of Leisure and Culture Dundee and the board, of which you're a member, have been working very, very actively with the council to ensure this is a partnership approach. So I think that you can rest assured, Councillor Mara, that we will continue that approach as we try and work through this challenging circumstance. I think to answer one or two other points that were made, convener, recommendation 2.6, I think really tries to speak to the challenge that we're facing, that both myself and the Managing Director of Leisure and Culture Dundee are working very, very hard to try and get the clarity of future funding from Scottish and UK governments, and that will continue to be a determining factor, I believe, in the recommendations we bring forward through the rest of this year.
Thank you, David. Next on my list is Craig Duncan. Councillor Duncan.
Thanks, convener. Probably a question to the acting head of Leisure and Culture. Page 216, the item 4.2.9 is around the funding from the UK and Scottish governments. There's going to be, we're told, 97 million allocated to the Scottish government. Then the next paragraph says, as yet, there's still no details of when it's going to be available, who can apply, etc., etc. Now, I'm concerned that obviously, through no fault of your own, you're in a position which might be described as somewhat urgent. And I think this lack of clarity as to who can apply, because I'm guessing that it won't be only Leisure and Culture Dundee, I'm guessing that other organisations will want to apply. Have you heard anything at all about when you're going to know what the details are, when you can apply, and most crucially of all, when any funding from this source might arrive with you?
I think the answer is probably no, Councillor Duncan, because it would have been contained in the report, but I'll let Judy answer.
Yes,
sorry,
worth asking anyway, I think.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Duncan. The answer is no at the moment. The officers are working hard with colleagues across Scotland and with our sectoral representatives, the different organisations that represent each individual element of Leisure and Culture Dundee at a national level. And we're waiting for that clarification. As soon as we get it, we will, if we're eligible, clearly put in an application.
Yeah, I think what I'm also getting at is there anything useful that this council can do to get the answers for you as soon as possible?
If anybody is in a position to have the information in advance, I would really welcome that.
I think just to respond to that, I can assure all members that there is a concerted lobbying exercise going on to ensure that any and all resources can come to the city to support the work of not only Leisure and Culture, the IGB, but also, of course, the council as well. So I'll give you that assurance. Good. I see no other questions, so Councillor Dawson, we'll go back to you and your amendment. And probably in keeping with how we've done it on the last two, Roger, can I please ask you to kindly read out the amendment?
Don't know if we've lost Roger. I can do it if it's of any help, John. Basically, okay. The amendment is amends recommendation 2.5 to read: note that Leisure and Culture Dundee have made a request for advance payment of the quarter four management fee in order to assist with the cash flow position, and agrees to that request. And the following recommendations 2.7, further instructs the Chief Executive and Acting Managing Director of Leisure and Culture Dundee to jointly write to the Scottish Government seeking bespoke support for ALIOs in Scotland, such as a loss of income scheme, in light of their continued and vital role in providing community, cultural, educational and sporting assets. To be fair, I think the amendment speaks for itself. We understand that both Leisure and Culture and the Council are in very precarious places. So basically, we need to do everything within our power to protect both organisations, but in relation to this report, Leisure and Culture Dundee specifically. As the amendment actually says, Leisure and Culture plays a pivotal part in the city, and I think will play a pivotal part in the recovery of the city going forward. And that this amendment also makes the case for ALIOs, our sister organisations across Scotland, who are clearly, as we've heard tonight, in a similar situation to ourselves. I think the one thing that's been forgotten by, I'd probably say Westminster in general on this, is that ALIOs are not as prevalent in the rest of the UK as they are in Scotland. And in some respects have been slightly forgotten about in the whole recovery plan of the Westminster government. I think that's why some of the funds that comes don't necessarily specifically relate to ALIOs and to organisations such as Leisure and Culture. Therefore, any encouragement that can be given from this council to the Scottish Government is welcomed. I also want to echo the thanks to the hard work that Judy and her staff have been done. She's probably fed up with me actually saying this, but it's been a very tricky situation for someone who is not long into the role to deal with, and I think Judy and her team have done it marvellously from lockdown onward. So I think we should be there rooting for Leisure and Culture, supporting them as much as we possibly can, and I hope that you agree to the amendment. I think I've had a quick look at Billy Keenan's amendment that was circulated as well, and I think our second section is very much in chime with what he is asking. So I'm hoping that they can basically support this and agree to that advance payment, which will help us out until at least to the end of the year. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Yep, absolutely. And I think the amendment, as you've outlined, is a sensible way forward. One acknowledges that Q4 payment will be advanced, but also seeks the necessary finance to support all those vital services. But Councillor Keenan, you can come in now.
Yeah, really quite happy to support that. And, I think that what we're asking for in our amendment, I must apologise for, I thought the run of the business would have been dealing with item 16 first. But items 16, 17 and 18 all have financial implications. And obviously within the amendment we've put together, it looks to address each individual one, looks towards getting the level of clarification that people have been asking for there. And I'm hoping that obviously you'll see to support that. It's asking the sort of Chief Executive to write a few letters, but getting direct to the point of looking for Barnett consequentials, looking for the loss of income money, looking for the Scottish Government, who have received some of that, to make the payment as early as possible. But in relation to Leisure and Culture, obviously they need that additional support. There has been culture money announced, and obviously Leisure and Culture need to capture that. We've heard from the trade unions if they're concerned about their members, and I believe we need to take that. So it was put up, the motion was put up with good intentions. It's looking really for that level of clarification that's needed to set the minds at rest. I know that just the other day, obviously, the Scottish Government announced an additional £1 million for the lockdown in Aberdeen. And, we've got a crisis here in Dundee that needs to be addressed. A health crisis in the uncertainty of funding coming in the direction of the integrated joint boards. So the motion is encompassing all three items, and I'm hoping that, like I've seen to support the motion that's put forward by yourself, you see to support this motion as well.
Thanks, Billy Keenan. I think they are, in essence, one and the same. They are asking the same thing. I think we're all on the same page, and certainly from the comments that I made at the start, that's a good thing. I think we are all pushing in the same direction. We're all seeking the same outcome, which is significant financial resource to ensure that the council, the IGB, the Leisure and Culture Dundee can provide those vital services, and that the people of Dundee don't suffer any detriment through consequences not of their choosing. So I think we're all absolutely in line on that. I mean, they're essentially the same thing as far as I'm reading, Bailey Keenan. So are you saying you're happy to support as outlined by Councillor Dawson?
Well, I take it that within Councillor Dawson, he's prepared to write to the Finance Minister to sort of seek that level of clarification, as we're suggesting it happens. And I'm hoping that, you know, having asked the legal advice about the motion, that you see fit to support the 3 sections of that, given that it's an issue that's affecting many different areas, but you know, it's finance affected right through different areas of council business. So, you know, I just see that the comments that I've made enhance what you've put forward yourself, and make sure that the letter goes off requesting the detail that Councillor Dawson seeks as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's in chime with what's already been outlined. So with all of that, I think we're all unanimous, and I see no other questions, although, sorry, Billy Sawyers, you've got your hands up.
Just very briefly, Convener, I mean, obviously these are slightly out of order from the agenda because of the deputation, quite rightly. But I think when Councillor Keenan, Bailey Keenan rather, sees our amendment to item 16, which covers the whole scale financial implications, he'll be quite content with what's being proposed.
As long as you're fighting your own government, Willie, I'm quite happy for you to do that on behalf of the city.
I think we're always fighting Dundee's corner, is the response to that, Billy Keenan. But
taking that up with both governments, Kevin.
Can I? Okay, thank you. Please don't talk across each other. With that, I presume this is agreed unless somebody tells me otherwise. So that item has been agreed, and we will move back to the agenda in the correct chronological order. Now, I was going to ask that items 2 to 11 were agreed en masse. However, I note that Bailey Wright has a question on item 7. So can I suggest that we agree items 2 to 11 with the exception of 7? Is that agreed? Okay, thank you. So we'll just move to item 7, and Bailey Wright, I'll let you ask your question immediately.
Yeah, thank you very much, Convener. Obviously, this proposal has already been agreed and a contract entered into at a cost of over £1 million, which means the decision by the full council is not required, and scrutiny may now have a limited value. But I would appreciate clarification on the following. If a better solution is identified, are there options for a break without penalty in this 4-year contract? What options were explored for alternatives to the existing Citrix service, particularly after our migration to Microsoft 365 this weekend? What options were or are now being considered for other alternative or complementary services? I understand that Microsoft Intune, for example, is comparable with new 365 applications and has licenses included at no additional cost. With many of the Microsoft 365 licensing plans, does this provide any opportunities for savings?
Okay, thank you, Bailey Wright. Obviously, this item, as you say, was agreed through the relevant spokespeople, but I will ask Greg to come in and just try and answer some of your questions there. Greg?
Thanks, Convener, and thanks, Bailey Wright, for the questions. Officers did consider a number of options before deciding to make the recommendation to move ahead with a 4-year Citrix deal. As you'll be aware, Citrix allows for access across multiple sites across the city, and at present the council runs over 280 applications on it, ranging from repair, payroll, pension schemes. The move at the weekend moved across to Office 365, but mostly to Microsoft Mail. And the reasons for that was in relation to part of our journey on our IT strategy, but also because the Lotus Note system the council was currently using was very outdated, offered limited integration, and as members would have seen through the last 4 months, it didn't link with events like Teams. Officers' view remains that over the next course of the few years, we will look to deploy very steadily all aspects of Microsoft 365, ranging from Teams, Azure, SharePoint, and the application that you talk about earlier on, Bailey Wright, is in fact being started to be used in terms of managing laptops that we're currently piloting with a number of staff so that they can access their emails securely without needing to log through Citrix. However, my professional advice remains the same, that the Council will get value for money, and I think that's been demonstrated over the past few months, where we moved from 300 people working from home to over 2,000 within a matter of 48 hours. And we will continue to use Citrix and indeed drive more value for money from Office 365. I do believe that Office 365 will give us more savings, particularly in relation to storage and indeed other areas, and officers will ensure it's delivered quickly and we maximise the benefits from that. I would also, Convener, if it's possible, just like to thank elected members for their patience over the weekend, and also to IT staff that were working late into last night to try to ensure a seamless approach to the new email system and are still dealing with tweaks. But I know I just want to put on record my thanks for the hard work and cooperation that we had certainly today from staff and elected members. So hopefully that answers your question, Bailey Wright, but I'm more than happy to provide any other information.
Yeah, thank you for that. It certainly does clarify it. The problem that we have as elected members is it goes quite well. It's really good on laptops, but it's no use on iPads. You're restricted in what you can do. So will you be thinking about issuing more laptops to people in the future?
Thanks, Bailey Wright and Convener. Again, if I can come back on, we're currently carrying out a trial on laptops, Bailey Wright, and over the last 8 weeks, the team's focus has been on getting ready the mobile devices for the young people within schools. However, with the majority of that being work in progress, we will look to extend the pilot to elected members to get feedback on what the devices are like and whether or not they're better. The iPads have been used now for just over 3 years, so I certainly in the next coming weeks will go out and offer devices as a trial to different elected members to get your views. So I'm happy if that's something you're interested with on other members to deal with that out with the meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. That can be
Yeah,
followed
I'm
up.
certainly happy with that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Helen. With those questions now, I presume nobody is otherwise minded. It's just for noting, so we'll move on. That item is agreed. I will hand back to Tracy.
Okay, that takes us on to item 12, Hospital Fund and Johnston request. You are asked to extend funding for a further 12 months.
I think this is self-explanatory and very good use of the money in question. See no comments. Is anyone otherwise minded? No. Okay, that item is agreed.
That takes us on to item 13, look back on DCC COVID-19 response, and you have a report before you.
I think through a number of contributions we've had this evening, we've all shown and illustrated our appreciation for the work that's been undertaken over the last few months, and as I mentioned, continues to be undertaken in light of some of the cases that we're continuing to see in relation to the Two Sisters facility at Kings Park and in other locations. And I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of how much effort, how much work has gone on in the background to make sure that all happens. It has not been without its difficulties, but our staff and volunteers and others have all stepped up to the plate. And that report before you provides detailed information about that response from the city-wide network of organisations in terms of how we've dealt with the pandemic. And there's plenty of learning in there, some good, some bad, and I hope that we can continue to learn from what we've achieved over the last 6 months as a city. And again, just note my thanks to all of those. Councillor Mara.
Thanks, Convener. I have a couple of questions, and I also have an amendment on this item. I'm not exactly sure whether I should move the amendment.
Okay, I'll ask for your
partly
amendment to be put in the group chat first,
maybe,
so we can see it.
If it can, Convener, if we maybe hold off on that for a second, maybe
okay.
It'll maybe perhaps depend on the answers to my questions, if that's okay. It's part because one of my questions is about the what's going to be done with this report, So we had some conversations with the Chief Executive last week regarding an urgent review into the work that's been undertaken by the Council in relation to the pandemic and our response to it. And I would agree that there's many good things in this report. It's clearly, and we've already talked, as you've just said, at some length, and given our thanks to the people who have put together much of that response. So if I can ask, one of my questions would be about what the intent of how this is going to be used. I do feel that there's a lot more could be added to the report, but frankly, about things that might not have gone as well as we might have hoped, where there were issues and what we can learn from. And particularly, we have to learn those issues locally and quickly, because we could be facing another lockdown over the winter months. So waiting for a parliamentary inquiry and then contributing to that, I don't think is sufficient. We need to see something. So I have an amendment to that effect, but it would be good to have a discussion about that first, or hear from the Chief Executive about where this is going to go. I have a specific question, and it relates to 7.4 and the care home strategy. That's on page 91. It states that no new resident would be admitted to a care home without having undergone 3 clear COVID tests. Many of you will have seen reports over the weekend that showed that in the NHS Tayside area there were 7 COVID positive patients who were admitted to care homes, and we found out just in the last 24 hours that that was partly under instruction or recommendations directly from the Scottish Government. So those 2 facts seem to me, the facts that are purported to be in this report and what we're hearing publicly, seem to be in conflict. So I'm looking for clarification on that. Were there people admitted to care homes who had tested positive for COVID, or were they not?
Thanks, Councillor Mara, for both your questions there. I'll let the Chief Executive come in first on the first part, and then Vicky Irons is on the call as well, and I'm sure she'd like to comment on the second part of that question. So, David.
Thanks, Convener. So the report before members is meant to be a fairly full description and analysis of how the City Council and the cities responded to an unprecedented public health pandemic, which we've not seen the like of before. And although we briefed group leaders and elected members through that period and periodically to make sure that they were up to date, this was an opportunity to bring something before all 29 elected members to try and give a pretty full explanation of how we handled this crisis to date. I think the point Councillor Mara makes about learning is absolutely fair. That I hope what members have seen in that report is that we've evolved our approach. So, for example, we, in terms of providing food and medicine and other support to citizens in the city who required help, we very quickly moved to a more inclusive approach and tried to personalise those services and to undertake a triage function, so that we tried very clearly to see whether there were other types of help that citizens required, financial help, welfare benefits, advisory services, those kinds of things. And we've continued to evolve the approach and refine it as we moved through the COVID period. So that's reflected in the paper. The issue about PPE, we've learned over the period of time what how we handle PPE, the West Housing Office, the involvement of the Michelin site. All of that, I think, provides some evidence of a continuous learning process. That will continue. The approach that we're now supporting across Tayside with the Two Sisters outbreak, the issues at Kings Park, that's built on our experience of dealing with the initial response to COVID. So that will continue. The report that you considered and approved earlier on the agenda about the recovery plan, I think, as Bailey Keenan mentioned, makes explicit reference to further reports. There'll be further reports on the issues that the deputation raised. There'll be further reports on the economy and so on. So I think that the spirit of what Councillor Mara is asking for, we think we've tried to capture in the recommendations. I do think that national inquiries, parliamentary inquiries, parliamentary committees, and those of that ministers have already committed to do, particularly in the context of hospital and care home relationships, are important. And when we get those reports back, which will be done nationally and locally, we will report that information back to elected members when the data is available. So certainly there is a real desire to continue the learning process, and certainly that's what the suite of reports that are in front of members today is trying to do. I think that the City and the City Council and our partners and the voluntary sector have responded very well and in a very joined up way to the COVID pandemic, but we're not at all complacent about that. And of course, we've learned in the process about how we would improve next time. Hopefully the report in front of you, together with the recovery plan, gives members that assurance. And if you're happy, Convener, I'll pass to Vicky Irons to deal with the particular point about care homes.
Thanks, David. Yeah, just before you do that, I was going to reference the item that we have already agreed in terms of the recovery plan, and just to give that reassurance, I suppose, in some ways that you just have, that the whole point of that recovery plan is it's a living, breathing document that adapts as we continue to move forward through this crisis, because we haven't necessarily finished this ordeal in any way, shape or form. And just going back to that specific report, which I realise we're not on at the moment, it talks about the recovery plan being kept under ongoing review. So there is clearly an opportunity there for elected members to ensure that if they feel that there's any specific elements that are not fully addressed, there is an opportunity through that regular reporting in terms of the recovery plan to ensure that that is included going forward. But with those comments, I'll ask Vicky to come in on your secondary question. Vicky?
Thank you. I'm happy to comment on our strategy in terms of the care home mobilisation plans and our response. I'm also conscious that we have slightly more detail available in the original mobilisation plan for the Health and Social Care Partnership in Dundee, and indeed the remobilisation plan. So in connection with the 2 points made, which I think largely refer to what we describe as transfers in care and also our testing regime, I think it's fair to say that from the initial onset of the pandemic up until very recently, we have absolutely kept alongside latest guidance, both in terms of transfers of care, but also the testing regime. So in the earliest parts of the pandemic, we were certainly in keeping with the national guidance and all available information from Health Protection Scotland when it came to transferring patients into care home settings, whether that be directly from community or from a hospital setting. And although in the earliest stages, we weren't undertaking the testing regime that subsequently evolved, we were isolating patients following transfer into a care home environment, and were very, very careful about all of those transfers and care that took place. So I can offer an assurance around that. Most of the clinicians locally, some of which are known to elected members, were very, very proactive around testing. And I'm sure many elected members will recognise that Tayside was really quite ahead of the game when it came to testing, both across the population in Dundee, but also specifically for staff and the households of staff too, and extended that quite considerably, not just over staff groups, but directly into patients' homes where we were providing care at home and into care homes themselves. Some of those clinicians initiated the testing that is referred to in this report prior to that becoming national guidance and the guidance of Health Protection Scotland. And in fact, feedback from Dundee and Tayside actually helped influence some of the guidance that changed from Health Protection Scotland in that respect. So since the guidance has changed and since we instigated the particular testing around these transfers of care in Dundee, we've done so consistently, and we've done so which makes any transfer in care, irrespective of whether that's into a care home or into somebody's own home setting, that we're doing so as safely and effectively as possible. But as I said, more than happy to share more details in terms of the specifics that are outlined in our mobilisation plans for care homes, if that's at all helpful.
I think that would be helpful, Vicky, if you could ensure that that's circulated around all elected members. That would be appreciated. Michael, I'll let you in.
And very briefly, John, I appreciate it. I know we've got a lot to get through. I have to say that answer does concern me. I think it flies in the face of what both we've been told by the Chief Executive in regular briefings and also what we read in this report tonight. It seems to me that that's a confirmation that people were transferred out of clinical settings into care homes after having a positive test. So I appreciate the offer of a further discussion on this. I have requested the testing policy from the Chief Executive of NHS Tayside on no less than 2 occasions. I've discussed this with the Chief Executive also on 2 occasions, and That has never been given to me. It's never been provided. So if we can get that information on the testing policy, how it's applied to care homes, but I'm really concerned to see the status of this report, because it sounds to me that there is something in this that just isn't true. So it says no new resident would be admitted to a care home without having undergone 3 clear COVID tests. I'm just hearing that that isn't the case. I mean, there are points, I think, there in terms of a timeline, in terms of when advice was put in place at different points. But it was my understanding in these conversations right from the start, and I've given my constituents who have actually parents and relatives in care homes the comfort that NHS Tayside took the position that they had to be tested before they went into care homes. So then to read that in the press at the weekend, that actually that's not what had happened, and to hear tonight that that's not what had happened, I think is totally unacceptable. There's a position in there where there's a lack of communication about the policy that was followed. So I think we do need to have a meeting about this. There does need to be a lot more clarity, and there has to be a lot more transparency about that policy that's being applied. So apologies, John, that might be a bit longer. I'm happy to have a further meeting with Ms Irons about it, and perhaps with the Chief Executive as well. I think there's very few issues, and I've got 100 questions of this document, frankly. But this to me is the one that is the basis of a national scandal in terms of the way this has been handled across Scotland. We have one of the highest care home death rates in Europe, and the issues of this I know will be dealt with by the Scottish Parliament, but locally we have to be able to tell our constituents what has happened, and at the moment I don't feel that I can.
Okay, no, absolutely fair and legitimate to ask those questions. Vicky, you want back in on that point?
Just very briefly, in case I've given any of members the wrong impression, my point being is that we have at all points throughout the pandemic response responded to the current guidance in terms of testing. And I think it is fair to reflect that at the outset of the pandemic, the testing regime across Scotland, across the UK, was different in terms of the situation that then evolved, and the testing that was extended across many transfers in care, but also across people presenting with symptoms. So I think the work we've undertaken in Dundee absolutely reflects and sticks to the guidance which we were issued as a system at that point in time. I note the comments about the timeline and having an understanding at how each component of that evolved throughout the pandemic, and I think we've got quite a good track of that, so I'm equally happy to provide details.
Please, that would be appreciated, and I think obviously getting answers to those questions fairly swiftly, given how many times Councillor Mara seems to have asked for that information, would be quite important as far as I'm concerned. Nobody else on this item, so unless someone is otherwise minded, I will take it as agreed. Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on.
Okay, item 14 has been dealt with. Item 15, COVID-19 Recovery Risk Register. Again, you have a report before you.
So the report presents the Council's COVID-19 Recovery Risk Register and asks members to note the remit. Note that, and also remit the Scrutiny Committee to consider this further. Is there any questions on the detail of this report? Nope, I'm seeing none. So unless somebody is otherwise minded, I'll take that as agreed. Okay, that item is agreed.
Okay, that takes us on to item 16, financial implications of the Council's response to the COVID-19 emergency, update and financial recovery plan.
So this report asks members to note the significant projected deficit on the Council's 2020-2021 revenue budget due to the cost implications of responding to the COVID-19 emergency. The report provides a financial recovery plan containing various measures aimed at mitigating the increased costs in financial year 2021 to protect the Council's financial sustainability going forward, and notes that representations will be made about further funding. Clearly, I think we've all spoken from our collective position of seeking more resource, and obviously we've had a couple of amendments that have been circulated in advance of this item. So first of all, can I ask Bailey Sawyers?
Thank you, Convener. I'll be very brief again. In summing up Mr. Colgan's report, he says we have a huge financial crisis. which I think we'd all agree on, although there's much mitigation work that Mr Colgan and his colleagues have taken to minimise that financial impact. And I'm not sure if my amendment has been circulated. You're nodding, convener.
Yes, it has. It was part of a pack of amendments that went together.
Right. So basically, as I've said, the report indicates that there are financial issues, and the amendment, to very briefly summarise, asks the Chief Executive and political group leaders to approach both the Scottish and UK governments, outlining the scale of the challenge we face and asking for financial assistance in dealing with this. And at that, I'll move, given the lateness of the hour.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rome, you've intimated that you want to second.
Yes, thank you, convener. In line with my colleague Bailey Sawyer, I'll be equally brief. Bailey Keenan and Bailey McPherson already asked us to make representations to everyone we could, basically via Solus and via the various governments. I think that's what these amendments seek to do, and I would hope for cross-party support on those amendments on that basis.
Thank you very much. My apologies both to Councillor Mara and to Bailey McPherson. The way my chat is showing, I missed their questions. So you've moved the amendment and seconded it, but I'm going to go back and let Fraser and Michael ask their questions on this item. So apologies for that. Fraser?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, could I maybe make a little point? Packs of amendments aren't very helpful. I've gone back and had a read, that's fine, but could we maybe just have them in future as the amendments separately so they're easier to find rather than digging through to page 3 of a pack. Now, Councillor Rome mentioned a moment ago that I'd asked that we made representations. That's not exactly where I was. Earlier, because I'm very conscious of the fact that officers have been very proactive, and COSLA has been very proactive in relation to raising issues with government, national government, regarding frankly, the crisis faced by local government. I mean, there is no way, if we look at the financial implications in this report, there is no way the city should be down 20 million for doing the right thing. And I suppose my question of officers, which is really alluding to what I asked in the item taken earlier, is if either Mr. Martin or Mr. Colgan could give an indication as to where we are with COSLA in relation to identifying across local authorities the funding gaps. Is that all that information with COSLA so that COSLA can go and argue the case with government, and also where that seeking of additional funding and flexibilities from government currently sits?
Thank you for that. Greg, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, and thanks, convener, and thanks, Bailey McPherson. So COSLA are aware of the certainly Dundee City Council's position, and my understanding is that all councils have done returns. Those returns initially focused on the first quarter of the year, and those returns are now full year returns. In terms of progressing, I understand that COSLA and indeed relevant professional organisations such as Directors of Finance and Solus continue to make representation to the government, and indeed so do Solus, particularly about, if you notice within my report under Appendix 3, the distribution of the 49 million of consequentials that came up at the start of July, and indeed the loss of income scheme. In terms of the loss of income scheme, COSLA have gathered information at the end of last week, again from all councils, outlining the scale of that. And I understand they will use that information to have discussions with Scottish Government around the different values of funding and indeed the submissions that have been made by councils. I also think, Bailey McPherson, what is helpful is that included within the recommendations of the report is that the report be used to give as evidence within the Local Government and Communities Committee, so that we are being very clear to that committee of the financial impact that COVID-19 has had on Dundee and on the council, and the measures that we're having to go to try to mitigate that. So that's why that was included as a recommendation. Just to the last question I think you had, Bailey McPherson, we're in active dialogue with Scottish Government about flexibilities, and as you quite rightly say, the intention would be not only to have flexibilities potentially for 2021, but look beyond that, because my professional judgment at the moment is the likelihood will be some of those pressures will continue into the next financial year. So hopefully that answers your questions.
That's very helpful indeed, Greg, and I'm grateful to you for that. I think we would all agree it's a highly worrying situation where effectively in not just Dundee but across Scotland, deficits, the potential deficits facing local authorities are more than the reserves. That's a seriously worrying situation, and I'm grateful for all the efforts officers are making. It is genuinely appreciated. I think Greg's comment about the situation post 2021 is again a very pertinent and valid one, because I think this is a medium to long term challenge facing local government. So grateful to Greg for his comments, and thank you, convener.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm just going to try and do this through the wizardry of modern technology, but in order to save people's voices as well as perhaps looking at these amendments, can everybody see these? So I'll share them side by side, and that perhaps might save Roger reading them both out, and it gives people an opportunity to read both whilst we continue with comments or questions. So Councillor Mara, you were next.
Sorry, now I'm absorbed by reading your shared screen, John. Okay,
sorry.
So my question related to some of the actual kind of provisions within it, in the report, which I believe essentially sets aside £4 million from equalities activities within education to pay towards the costs that are incurred throughout the incurred during the pandemic. I'm not going to get into debating the rights or wrongs of that particular approach. I think but what I'm looking for to find out so that essentially to me is the PEF money in particular. I want to ask what resource will be made available to head teachers in this year to spend on kids who need that support, given particularly the circumstances they feel. I actually, in these earlier reports, another point that I wanted to raise around it, and in terms of the process, is that I don't see much emphasis on the kind of catch-up approach that we're going to need as an education authority for kids who have actually just missed a significant part of schooling over the previous months. You look at Professor Lindsay Patterson at Edinburgh talking about the actual huge impact that just these months now have had on growing the attainment gap and the impact on poorer kids in particular. So I just want to know what we're going to do to make sure that the money is with, or some form of resources with head teachers, and how will that be allocated to schools? When will we hear about how that's going to work?
Thanks, Councillor Mara. I'll ask officers to comment. I think there's probably one, Paul Clancy and Audrey May are not on the call, so perhaps officers won't have the necessary detail to hand to be able to answer that. But should they be unable to answer on the hoof at the moment, then I'll ask that information is circulated after the meeting as well. But David, do you want to comment initially?
Thanks, convener. I think if it's okay, I maybe ask Greg to comment on that, because I think the report tries to deal with some of those consequences, and I'm happy to come in and sweep up if I can.
Of course.
And failing which, we'll get some information back to Councillor Mara first thing tomorrow.
Thanks, convener. As you've said, Councillor Alexander, we don't have the detailed information. However, the £4 million that's noted in the report, you'll be aware that Scottish Government have provided flexibilities. That £4 million is only being used to fund additional costs through the children and family section. And at the moment, what we're trying to do is build a picture on what we believe the additional costs will be. However, they could deteriorate depending on potential any further reduction in income or expenditure increases that we've got. My intention at the moment, Councillor Mara, is to use carry forward monies which relates to underspends in 1920 that have been brought into 2021 and are noted within the annual accounts. At present, I'm not looking at any current in-year funding, such as the PEF, but I'm actively working with Mr Clancy on the detail, and I'm happy to share that with members of the committee once it's completed, and Paul and I have had the opportunity to review.
Paul's just commented in the chat, as people will see. Paul, do you want to come in at this point? Apologies, I didn't realise you were there.
Yeah, thanks, convener. No, just to agree with Greg saying, I mean, we're still very hopeful that PEF funding would be available for schools, and the next Children and Families Committee, we are bringing forward a report that sets out in a bit more detail what schools are actually doing with the young people as they're coming back. It is outlined in a local phasing implementation plan that we had to submit to Scottish Government. But obviously at present, the first 2 or 3 weeks, we're really trying to get the young people settled back into school. The schools already have plans to try and run across October and across Easter to provide that extra time that young people will need to catch up. So just to give an assurance that I think teachers are planning to do everything in their power this year to make sure that that gap is closed.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. Thank you, Michael. Bailey Keenan, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Quite happy to see your amendment going forward. I think that what we're looking as a Labour group to achieve can be easily done within that. Be quite interested to hear the comments from the Chief Executive as to how he sees Solace influencing that. I know that the Chief Executive is a very powerful individual within Solace, but you know, I would yet to hear how he feels he will influence the government more so than politicians would. So.
I think, not speaking for Bailey Sawyers, but I think the amendment seeks to ensure that there's a multi-pronged approach to this and a lobbying exercise that is inclusive of both officers and politicians. And I think, you know, that last recommendation is in terms of politically coming together to write to both governments to lay out those challenges in great detail and what the manifestation of any potential cuts could be and how they would be impacting the people of Dundee is quite important. So I think it's probably let's do all of the above rather than looking at any one specific way forward. But I'll ask the Chief Executive to come in.
I'm in agreement with you. I'm just asking for the Chief Executive to make a comment.
And I'll let him come in now.
Thanks, convener. Yes, I think two things really. First of all, that obviously as Chief Executive of the authority, then elected members instructing me, asking me to lobby on your behalf of any particular source for resources, I'm more than happy to take that on board. I think as Bailey Keenan says, I mean, quite clearly political leadership is the key issue here in terms of lobbying government for change funding. But just to give members the reassurance that, you know, as one of 32 chief executives in Scotland, I'm meeting with my colleagues regularly, and I'm making the case for the fact that an awful lot of the COVID losses have been occurred in Scotland's cities. And the reason for that, of course, significantly is that income, and particularly income for facilities that are being closed, significantly takes place in those cities. So I believe that what Mr Colgan talked about earlier on in terms of information being submitted to COSLA does in fact demonstrate that. So I will be arguing through my professional association, as indeed will Mr Colgan, that the funding that should become available, one hopes, through the lobbying work that you and the other group leaders and all elected members are doing on behalf of Dundee, should actually flow significantly towards where the gaps in finance have accrued, and that's particularly in cities like Dundee. So I'll be lobbying and making that point based on evidence and fact, of course, in my professional associations. But I would stress ultimately that the role of officers in situations like this is to help support elected members in trying to achieve the decisions they want to take.
Thank you very much for that. So I think we're unanimous. Now, Stephen, I do see that you wanted a supplementary comment, but I'm just going to move on because I realise there's still some significant items to discuss and you have made a contribution so far. So apologies for that, but I'm going to allow Philip, I did say that I was going to move on, so if you don't mind, and apologies for this, but I want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to speak on the other items as well, and we've still got quite a significant number, so I'm going to move on with the item. And thank you for indicating that you are in favour of those amendments. So with everything that's said, and obviously setting out the amendment, I'm happy to accept that. I think Bailey Keenan has said the same, and it goes to the ends of delivering what we all want to see, which is the full resource to close off any gap in our budget. I see no one otherwise minded, so I presume this is agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move on.
Okay, item 17, Dundee Health and Social Care Partnership COVID-19 Mobilisation Plan Financial Review.
Again, in keeping with the severity of the financial situation and what we've discussed tonight, this report details and provides an overview of the financial consequences to the Health and Social Care Partnership in terms of the strategic and operational response to COVID-19. So I will just invite any members who may have a question at this point for officers or comment. No. Okay. So with that, now, am I right in thinking both Bailey Keenan and Ken have amendments? And if people don't mind, I'm going to share my screen and make sure that we can see them side by side again. So if you give me a moment, I'll ask Councillor Lynn to start speaking while I'm setting up the screen.
Yes, so has this motion been circulated, or should I read it out?
It's been circulated, but feel free to read it out. I will also display it on the screen.
Well, if it's displayed, I wouldn't read it out verbatim, but the report essentially details the additional expenditure as incurred as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the extra funding which has already been received from the Scottish Government to cover these costs. It's our expectation that these costs will be met in full, and the amendment seeks to ensure that the Cabinet Secretary is even more aware of this than she already is by sending the report along with an accompanying letter. That's the essence of the amendment.
Thank you very much. Just, my screen's disappeared. Give me a moment. Thank you very much for that. I presume everybody can see it on their screen. I think Bailey Keenan, I'll invite you to comment as well, because clearly there's a motion here. I think, again, they do the exact same thing.
They're much of a muchness. Happy, go whatever one you like, and let's move on.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Straightforward enough. I don't think there are any other questions or comments. So with that, unanimously agreed, and nobody, no voices of dissension. Okay, that's agreed. We'll move on.
Okay, item 18 has been dealt with. Item 19, revenue monitoring 2020-21.
Thank you. The report is the standard revenue report that provides members with an analysis of the projected outturn against the adjusted 2020-2021 revenue budget. Any questions or comments on this paper? I see none in the chat, so I will take it as given that this is agreed. Thank you.
Okay, item 20, capital expenditure monitoring 2020-2020.
Thank you very much for that. I'm just making sure that everybody's muted to prevent that echo. So again, standard report on the capital monitoring plan. Do I have any questions or comments on this? I see none. And no voices of dissent, so this will be agreed unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on.
Item 21, Joint City Plan and Council Plan Progress Report 2019-2020.
This is the joint report on the City Plan and Council Plan, which aims to capture the progress on the strategic priorities and performance targets as of March 2020. Overall, 67% of the performance indicators in the city plan have improved since the baseline in 2017, and 59% have improved compared to the year before. Clearly, there is much still to progress with. There is much still to improve on, but I think this provides a really important context for the decisions that we've made tonight, and obviously will continue to make. It's really important just to look at some of the detail within this report and I suppose ensure that we are scrutinising each and every aspect of that plan against what we expect to see and hope to see in the future as well. Is there any questions or comments? Nothing indicated. So if no one is otherwise minded, I'll take that report as agreed. Thank you.
Okay, that takes us on to item 22, Communication Strategy 2018-2021.
Again, usually I would just say this is a regular update report and move on, but I think it's really important, and I'm sure Bailey McPherson might be about to say something along similar lines, just to acknowledge the tremendous efforts of the communications team working in conjunction with NHS Tayside and many others over the last few months. Communication has been absolutely integral to the Council's response to COVID-19 and ensuring that we are providing the best possible information to members of the public, that we are updating members of the public on emerging issues. And we've seen that just in the last week, how that combination of NHS and Dundee City Council communications team have worked jointly to ensure that there's effective communication. So I want to put my thanks on record for the entire team, because I think in many ways they can be overlooked, and I think their work is incredibly vital to all of our work and to the work of, as I say, NHS, IJB and the Council more broadly. But Bailey McPherson, I'll let you in.
Thanks, Convener. I'll be necessarily brief given the hour, but just basically to concur with your view that I think the communications team have done an absolutely splendid job during the health emergency. I think Dundee City Council has been one of the most proactive in terms of updates to citizens, and the social media coming from the council in the last 2 or 3 years has absolutely transformed in terms of its scale, its scope and its quality. So I think it's a very big thank you from me, and I'm sure from others, as to the hard work that the communications team have put in. I think they do an absolutely exemplary job.
Thank you, Bailey McPherson. I'm sure that will be fed back to the rest of the team as well, and I'm sure it's appreciated. Bailey Keenan.
Just to echo that, I think that they've done a really good job over a period of time. It's one of these things that is very difficult to satisfy the public that you've got it right every time. And today I've had calls from people at Kings Park School that think we haven't, as a council, communicated well with them over the last 5 days. So I think it's something that, it wouldn't be the communications team that was putting out. I think it'd be, others for council should be phoning and setting that reassurance, giving that kind of offer of support or whatever that families need. So I think it's something that we need to take on board and do that. But, everything that we've done has been trying to improve communication. Any requests that we've made through leaders' meetings and other councillors making suggestions have been taken on board to try to make things better for people. And in general, we've done really well. But there's always points for learning. I think that the Kings Park thing needs to be picked up with officers at some time soon and dealt with. Cheers.
Thanks for your comments, Bailey Keenan, much appreciated, and I'm sure those points will be taken up by officers as well. So no other comments. I'll take that as this item being agreed, as there's no voices of dissension. Okay, we'll move on.
Item 23, improving services through listening to customers and service users.
I think that was Bailey Keenan has just made the point, I suppose, and why it's so important to get that feedback from members of the public, listen to it and learn from it. And I think that's exactly what this report seeks to set out in terms of how the council responds to members of the public, their view, their criticisms, but also their constructive feedback as well. Is there any questions, comments on this? Nope. Okay, I'll take that as agreed, unless I see any other voices in the chat. Okay, that's agreed.
Okay, item 24, Brexit update.
Where to begin? As if it wasn't enough to deal with COVID-19. Obviously, this report provides an update on the developments regarding the UK's departure from the EU and on the work being carried out to continue to monitor the implications of that decision, and regular reporting will continue as things develop. And officers have done a tremendous job in pulling all of that together and trying to condense it into a report. So my thanks to them as well. Councillor Duncan, you've got a question.
Sorry. Thanks, Convener. Sorry, I was on mute there. Yeah, I mean, in a way, you've hit the nail on the head. It's as if we didn't have enough to deal with COVID, which was probably nobody's fault. But Brexit's something that, you know, was more than the human control, as it were. I'm just wondering, on page 377, we talk about other financial impacts, and that we're continuing to monitor the time spent by officers on Brexit. Can we have an idea of how much this is actually costing us? Even vaguely.
Greg, do you have any information? It may well be that might have to be circulated after the meeting, Craig, but I'll ask Greg if he has any details.
Thanks, Convener. I don't have any specific details in response to Councillor Duncan. Mrs Calder may have that information, or alternatively we could submit it after the meeting.
Andrea, do you have any detail to hand?
Yeah, up until the end of March this year, we estimated the officers' time was about £350,000 since the start of our preparations, and we've been given £50,000 as income from the Scottish Government towards that.
Okay, thank you for that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. See no other questions or comments on this item. So again, anyone otherwise minded? Nope. Okay, this item's agreed.
Okay, item 25, draft Gaelic language plan.
Obviously, the detail within the report sets out the outcome of the consultation on the first draft of the Council's second Gaelic language plan. Is there any questions or comments on this? Nope. Okay, anyone otherwise minded? Okay, take that as agreed. Thank you.
Item 26, Common Good Fund.
I think this is self-explanatory again. Any questions or comments? Nope. Oh, sorry. Margaret. Okay, Margaret, if I can ask officers first of all to put the amendment in the chat to allow us to have a read of that, or Roger, do you want to read it out in the first instance, and then Margaret, I'll let you in to speak to it, if that's okay.
Thank you, Convener. I'll read out the amendment while it's being put in the meeting chat. The amendment, which is in the name of Councillor Richardson, reads as follows. At 2.2, add after COVID-19 in line 5, including support for organisations delivering services addressing food poverty within the city during the course of this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Margaret, do you want to speak to your amendment?
Yes, thank you. Councillors will be aware of the fantastic work that's been carried out by the Food Insecurity Network, led by Faith and Community, representing a number of food charities across all wards in the city during lockdown period and on into the summer. They'll also be aware that the Council provided vital support of £10,000 per week to augment the food charities' work. I ask all councillors to agree to use a significant part of the money available to continue to support this great work. As I see it, the need will increase substantially over the next few months, especially once the furlough scheme comes to end and many more of our citizens are out of work. Food is the biggest priority as far as I can see, and I think my party agrees, and no child in the city should go hungry. I would urge all councillors to note this amendment.
Thanks, Margaret. I would say from the outset, absolutely agree with what you've said there. The work has been tremendous so far. It's clearly going to continue to be a need, and the work with partner organisations has been second to none over the last few months, and I'm more than happy with your suggested amendment, but I will let George in. George?
Thanks, Convener. More than happy to second Councillor Richardson's amendment in allocating funds to continue to support We've seen the vital work a food insecurity network provides and has done since lockdown, Chair, as you've mentioned, since the start of the pandemic across the city. As it says in the report, the Common Good Fund is primarily to support organisations who deliver services for the common good of the city. And what better way, an effective way, to use some of these funds and assist in the bigger efforts to feed the people of Dundee who have been caught up in the poverty trap due to the economic downturn and uncertainty we witness now, and indeed also the people who are already there in that poverty trap. As Councillor Richardson mentions, the Food Insecurity Network has been running since spring and it's been coordinated by Dundee City Council, DVVA and Faith in the Community to ensure that over 20 local community and voluntary groups are providing that vital lifeline, distributing food and other necessary products to the most vulnerable in our society. I've witnessed firsthand over these past few months the monumental efforts of these voluntary and community projects. The Lochie Hub, taught by Mohammed, Dundee Bairns, Kirton Community Larder, to name but a few, and the ones close to my heart in the Coalside Ward, the Grey Lodge, Maxwell Centre and the Haven. Without these community groups, I would dread to think, Chair, where we would be in ensuring Dundonians most in need were regularly fed. As it states in the Common Good Fund, it should not meet expenditure of a recurring nature, but we find ourselves in a very unique situation with this global pandemic. The current plight of hundreds, if not thousands of Dundonians have been directly affected, and I argue it's only right we ensure, as best as we can, that no child, woman or man goes hungry in our city. The current unallocated monies of the Common Good Fund isn't a huge sum of money in the grand scheme of things of a council budget. However, it would make a big difference to small organisations who are trying their level best to meet the needs and demands of a city that sees people go hungry on a daily basis. And whilst we recognise there are other groups and organisations who also carry out worthwhile efforts in helping the people of Dundee, I feel it is appropriate if we agree tonight to secure at least a minimum of 20% of the current unallocated funds to the Food Insecurity Network that's coordinated by the DVVA and Faith in Communities. As Councillor Richardson stated, the City Council have been providing £10,000 a week for food insecurity over the summer months. And I think tonight, if we agree to 20% of the unallocated funds, that would equate to roughly 2 weeks' worth of food provision in the city in the preparation for the winter months ahead. So lastly, Chair, in the spirit of working together and moving in the right direction, as you said earlier, in these uncertain times, I hope there's a consensus to this amendment from across the chamber.
Okay, thank you very much, George, for your comments there. In terms of the wording of your amendment, as I've said, happy to include that. I think it's really important to recognise, as you've both outlined, the incredible contributions. There's also been additional money coming from Scottish Government, £480,000 to support that work as well, and hopefully that will continue in some way, shape or form. I think if we can maximise the resources being ploughed into that, then that's a good thing indeed for all of us and for the citizens of Dundee. So with that, and I don't see any, again, dissenting comments, I take that as agreed. Thank you.
That takes us on to the confidential part of the meeting. You may wish to deal with this in the usual manner.
Can we agree that in the usual manner? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attendance, your contributions and your good behaviour, and I will see you all soon again. Thank you. Have a good night. Take care.
Good night. Good night. Good night.